Tax law, for trailer trash like you. They laughed when Sarah hunched over textbooks after midnight shifts, mascara smudged from exhaustion. Now they're calling her corner office in tears. The IRS has frozen their accounts and they're facing prison time. 5 years transformed the mocked waitress into the most feared tax attorney in 3 counties, her rates as ruthless as her reputation. The same people who once left her pathetic tips now empty their savings for 15 minutes of her time. As Sarah reviews another desperate plea from a former tormentor, she traces the engraved pen her daughter gave her when they finally moved out of subsidized housing. The girl had written one word on the card: revenge. Sarah smiles, adjusts her designer blazer, and makes her decision about whether mercy or justice will prevail today. Would you help those who once crushed your dreams, or watch them drown in the consequences they created? Comment below and subscribe to our channel for more stories of sweet, calculated redemption that will make your heart race. The fluorescent lights of Blue Hill Diner flickered overhead as Sarah wiped down the counter, her fingers raw from the harsh cleaning solution. It was Tuesday, which meant the dinner rush had been replaced by a steady trickle of truckers and night shift workers. Her feet ached in the cheap non-slip shoes she'd bought at the discount store after her last pair had finally given out. Sarah, table 6 needs a refill, and 7 just sat down. Vanessa's voice carried across the diner, sharp and commanding. Despite having started at Blue Hill 3 months after Sarah, Vanessa had quickly become head waitress. Her bleach blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her uniform somehow unwrinkled even after a double shift. On it, Sarah called back, grabbing the coffee pot. She'd learned early that responding to Vanessa with anything but immediate compliance meant enduring passive-aggressive comments for the rest of the shift. As she refilled the trucker's mug, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and a strand of mousy brown hair had escaped her ponytail. 16 hours on her feet today, and she still had studying to do when she got home. You look like hell warmed over, the trucker said. Not unkindly, he was a regular, always left exactly 15%. Thanks, Sarah replied with a practiced smile. Need anything else? Just the check when you get a chance. She nodded and moved to table 7, where a young couple sat scrolling through their phones. They barely looked up as she took their order, the girl specifying every ingredient that should be left off her salad. Hey Sarah, Jerry, the fry cook, called through the service window. Your bag fell over. Books everywhere. Sarah froze. She'd left her backpack in the break room, textbooks inside. She excused herself from the couple and rushed to the back, but it was too late. Vanessa stood in the break room doorway, holding Sarah's tax law textbook, a smirk playing at her lips. Tax law, seriously. She flipped through the pages with exaggerated confusion. What are you going to do with this? Sarah reached for the book. I'm taking night classes at the community college. Vanessa held it away from her. Oh my God, you think you're going to be a lawyer? She laughed, the sound drawing the attention of Jerry and Diane, another waitress. Tax law, for trailer trash, like you. Heat rushed to Sarah's face. Give me my book, Vanessa. Listen, honey. Vanessa's voice took on a mock's empathetic tone. People like us serve the lawyers, we don't become them. She tossed the heavy book onto the table. You're wasting your time. Jerry snickered. Tax attorney Sarah, I can see it now. I'm just trying to better myself, Sarah said quietly, shoving the book back into her bag. Better yourself. Diane joined in. By what? Helping rich people hide their money. The IRS doesn't even know people like us exist unless they want to audit our tip reporting. It's not like that, Sarah said. I want to help people who get taken advantage of. The only person getting taken advantage of is you, Vanessa said. Paying for those classes when you can barely keep your lights on. Does your daughter even get to see you? The mention of Lily made Sarah's stomach clench. Don't talk about my daughter. Hey, I'm just saying what we're all thinking. Vanessa shrugged. You can barely manage being a waitress and a mom. Now you want to play lawyer too. The break room erupted in laughter. Sarah zipped her bag closed, hands trembling with humiliation and rage. Table 7's waiting on their order, she said, pushing past them. She wouldn't cry. Not here. As she re-entered the dining area, she heard Vanessa's voice. $10 says she drops out by Christmas. 20 says she fails her first exam. Jerry countered. Sarah took a deep breath and approached table 7 with her professional smile firmly in place. She needed this job, needed the tips, needed the flexible schedule that allowed her to attend night classes. What she didn't need was their approval later. As the diner emptied and they prepared to close, Sarah mopped the floor while Vanessa counted her tips at the counter. "Damn good night," Vanessa announced, fanning out her bills. "Over 200. How'd you do, Sarah?" Sarah didn't look up. "Fine. Just fine. Maybe if you spent more time connecting with customers instead of daydreaming about tax brackets." Sarah pushed the mop harder against the linoleum. One day, she promised herself, one day, they'd see Dot when her shift finally ended at 11 p.m. Sarah trudged to the bus stop, her backpack heavy on her shoulder. She had 2 hours before she needed to relieve Mrs. Garza, who watched Lily in the evenings, 2 hours to study on the bus, and in the laundromat where she needed to wash Lily's school clothes for tomorrow. As she waited in the cold, she opened her tax law textbook, ignoring the ache in her feet and the echo of their laughter in her ears. The assisted living facilities smelled of antiseptic and canned vegetables. Sarah clutched Lily's hand as they walked down the hallway, past residents who stared vacantly at a muted television. This place was a far cry from the tidy 3-bedroom home where Sarah had grown up. "Is Grandpa going to remember me today?" Lily asked, her voice small. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "Let's hope so, sweetheart." They found her mother sitting beside her father's bed, working on a crossword puzzle. Martha Cooper looked up, her face brightening at the sight of her granddaughter. "There's my girl," she said, holding out her arms as Lily ran to her. Sarah's father dozed in his bed, thin and diminished. The stroke had accelerated his dementia, leaving him a shadow of the meticulous accountant he'd once been. "How is he today?" Sarah asked, kissing her mother's cheek. Martha's smile faltered. "About the same. The nurse said he was agitated this morning." Sarah nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Dad," she said softly. "It's Sarah." His eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his gaze before recognition slowly dawned. "Sarah," he whispered. For a moment, she saw her father as he'd been, the man who'd taught her to balance a checkbook at 10, who'd insisted she understand compound interest before her first savings account, the financial wizard who'd somehow still fallen prey to predators when his mind began to fail. "I brought your tax books," Martha said, gesturing to a cardboard box in the corner. "From his office. They're having the estate sale next week." The estate sale, the final dismantling of her parents' life together to pay for medical bills and elder care. Sarah swallowed hard. "Have you heard anything from the lawyer?" she asked. Martha shook her head. "That tax service filed everything wrong for years. The IRS penalties wiped out most of the retirement savings. And with the reverse mortgage." She trailed off, watching Lily show her grandfather a drawing. "I should have noticed something was wrong sooner," Sarah said. "How could you?" "We didn't even notice, and we were signing the papers." Martha patted her hand. "That man seemed so professional. Your father trusted him." Sarah had seen the so-called tax professional's office once, a storefront next to a check-cashing place, with promises of maximum refunds guaranteed. In the window, by the time they discovered the fraudulent deductions and unreported income, the damage was done. The tax service had closed, its proprietor vanished, leaving her parents to face the consequences. "I'm going to fix this," Sarah said suddenly. "I'm studying tax law. I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen to other people." Her mother looked at her with a mixture of pride and worry. "Sarah, honey, that's a long, expensive road." "I know. I've already started. Community college for now. But there are transfer programs, scholarships. But Lily, I'm doing it for Lily. And for you and Dad." Sarah's voice strengthened. "I won't let people like that get away with this." That evening, after tucking Lily into bed in their tiny 1-bedroom apartment, Sarah spread her textbooks across the kitchen table. Their visit to the facility had hardened something inside her, a determination that burned brighter than her exhaustion. The apartment was small but clean, the furniture second-hand but carefully chosen. Sarah had made a home here, even if it was nothing like the house she'd grown up in. Lily's drawings covered the refrigerator, and a carefully tended piece, Lily, sat on the windowsill, a gift from a customer who couldn't leave a proper tip. She opened her laptop to the online portal for her financial accounting class. Professor Wilkins had posted the results from their midterm exam. Sarah clicked on the grade report, holding her breath. 89/100. Not perfect, but strong. The comments praised her analytical skills and attention to detail. At the bottom, a personal note. "Sarah, you have a natural aptitude for this material. Have you considered the paralegal program as a stepping stone to law school? Let's talk during office hours." Professor WSR stared at the screen, exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Someone believed in her. Someone who knew what they were talking about thought she could do this. Her phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa, covering Diane's shift tomorrow. Need you to take mine? Non-negotiable. The bubble of hope deflated slightly. Tomorrow was Lily's parent-teacher conference, and Sarah had already arranged to swap shifts with Jerry. Now she'd have to work a double, and miss the conference entirely. She texted back a simple okay, and returned to her studies, the words blurring as fatigue set in. Just a few more pages, just a few more ... Sarah jerked awake to the gentle touch of a blanket being laid over her shoulders. Lily stood beside her in unicorn pajamas, her expression solemn. You fell asleep on your books again, Mommy. Sarah straightened, wincing at the crick in her neck. What time is it? Almost midnight. I got thirsty. Sarah rubbed her eyes. I'm sorry, baby. Let's get you some water and back to bed. As she tucked Lily in for the second time that night, her daughter asked, Are you going to be a lawyer like on TV? Not exactly like TV. Sarah smiled. I want to help people with tax problems, like Grandma and Grandpa had. Lily nodded sleepily. You'll be the best one. I'm going to try, Sarah whispered, kissing her forehead. After Lily drifted off, Sarah returned to the kitchen table, the blanket still around her shoulders. She picked up her tax law textbook, thinking of her father's vacant eyes, her mother's worry lines, and the home they'd lost. This was her breaking point, not the collapse, but the moment everything changed direction. No more accepting what happened to her or the people she loved. From now on, she would fight back with the only weapons that mattered, knowledge and determination. She opened the book and began to read again. The next 3 years passed in a blur of endless days and sleepless nights. Sarah's life became a carefully orchestrated dance of timing and endurance. Wake at 5 a.m., get Lily ready for school, work the morning shift, attend afternoon classes, pick up Lily, help with homework, make dinner, study until midnight, collapse, repeat. Weekends meant double shifts at the diner, with Lily sitting in a back booth doing homework or reading. The regular customers knew her, slipping her quarters for the gumball machine or bringing her small treasures, a sparkly pencil, a paperback book, a bracelet made of colorful threads. You shouldn't have your kid here all day, Vanessa would say, loudly enough for the manager to hear. It's not professional, but Sarah had no choice. Mrs. Garza could only watch Lily after school on weekdays, and childcare would have devoured what little savings Sarah managed to scrape together for her education. Mommy, are you going to class tonight? Lily asked one Tuesday evening as they walked home from the bus stop, her Barbie backpack bouncing against her legs. Yes, honey, Mrs. Garza will stay with you until I get home. Can I stay up to see you? Sarah smiled wearily. Not tonight. I'll have a test, so I'll be late. You always have tests. The reproach in her daughter's voice made Sarah's heart ache. At 8 years old, Lily was becoming increasingly aware of how different their life was from her classmates. No father, no house with a yard, no mother who attended PTA meetings or chaperoned field trips. I know it seems like forever, Sarah said, kneeling to look her daughter in the eye, but what I'm doing now means things will be better later. Remember how we talked about investing? Lily nodded solemnly. You put in something now to get more back later. That's right. I'm investing time now so we can have a better life later. But you're a fancy lawyer. Lily's eyes brightened. Exactly. Sarah kissed her forehead. Now, race you to the stairs. They thundered up to their third-floor apartment, momentarily carefree. These precious moments, stracing upstairs, braiding hair before school, weekend movie nights with popcorn on their second-hand sofa, these were what kept Sarah going through the exhaustion. By her third year of community college, Sarah was maintaining a 3.9 GPA while still working nearly full-time. Professor Wilkins had become her mentor, guiding her through scholarship applications and transfer requirements for the state university's pre-law program. You're one of the most promising students I've seen, he told her during office hours. Most people with your workload would have given up by now. I don't have that luxury, Sarah replied simply. The diner had become both her lifeline and her albatross. She needed the income but resented every hour spent there, hours she could have been studying or with Lily. Hey, college girl, Jerry called as she entered for her shift. Heard you aced another exam. Sarah nodded, tying her apron. Word had gotten around about her academic success, shifting the mood from mockery to something more complex. Some like Jerry, showed grudging respect. Others, like Vanessa, seemed increasingly irritated by her persistence. Don't see how tax law helps you remember orders, Vanessa snipped. When Sarah mixed up a ticket, maybe focus on the job you actually have. The jabs continued, but Sarah had developed a thicker skin. She kept her head down and her focus tight, until the day everything threatened to unravel. We need to talk. Ed, the diner owner, called her into his office during the pre-dinner lull. Your schedule. Sarah's stomach clenched. Is there a problem? You've been working here, what, 5 years now? Almost 6? Ed nodded, leaning back in his creaky chair. You're reliable. Customers like you. But these constant schedule changes for your classes are getting to be too much. I've always found someone to cover my shifts, Sarah protested. That's not the point. We're running a business here, not a charity. He slid a paper across the desk. Here's the deal. You work these shifts, no changes, no swaps, or you find another job. Sarah stared at the schedule. Friday nights, Saturday mornings, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, exactly when her most important classes were scheduled for the upcoming semester. Ed, I can't. My finals, not my problem. Sarah. His voice was flat. Plenty of people would be happy to have your job. She left the office in a daze. 6 years of juggling work and school, never missing a shift, always finding coverage when she needed it. And now, with just 1 semester left before she could transfer to the university, she was being forced to choose. Scheduling trouble. Vanessa's voice dripped with false sympathy as Sarah emerged. I told Ed it wasn't fair how you're always changing things around the course. Vanessa had been made assistant manager last month. I need this job, Sarah said quietly. And we need reliable employees. Vanessa smiled. Don't worry, I'm sure your little college experiment was fun while it lasted. That night, after her shift, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by bills, rent, utilities, phone, Lily's school supplies. Without her diner income, they wouldn't make it through the month, let alone the semester. Mom, Lily stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Why are you crying? Sarah hadn't even realized tears were streaming down her face. She quickly wiped them away. Just tired, baby. Go back to bed. Instead, Lily patted over and climbed into her lap. Though at 10 she was getting almost too big for this. Is it about school? Are you gonna have to stop? Sarah hesitated. She'd always been honest with Lily, but she tried to shield her from their financial struggles. I might have to take a break, she admitted. Just for a little while. Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she slid off Sarah's lap and disappeared into their shared bedroom. She returned with a folder decorated with stickers and marker drawings. I was saving this for your graduation, she said, handing it to Sarah. Inside was a childish drawing of a building with future law office written in careful block letters. 2 stick figures stood outside, one tall with brown hair, one small, with pigtails. Sarah Cooper, tax attorney, was printed beneath them. Mrs. Garza helped me spell everything right, Lily said proudly. You can't quit, Mom, you're almost there. Sarah held her daughter close, the drawing clutched in her hand. Somehow, she would find a way. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning as Sarah cleared tables between the breakfast and lunch rushes. She almost deleted it, assuming it was another student loan solicitation. Instead, she found herself staring at an offer that seemed too good to be true. Ms. Cooper, it read, based on Professor Wilkins' recommendation and your exceptional academic record, we would like to invite you to interview for our competitive summer internship program at Blackwell and Hayes Tax Attorneys. Sarah read it 3 times, her heart racing. Blackwell and Hayes was one of the most respected tax law firms in the city. Their internships were typically reserved for law students from prestigious universities, not community college students working toward transfer credits. You look like you've seen a ghost, Jerry said, peering over her shoulder at her phone. Bad news. No, she said softly. Maybe good news. Really good. The interview was scheduled for the following Thursday during her shift, of course. Sarah approached Ed with trepidation, requesting yet another schedule change. Absolutely not, he said flatly. We had an agreement, Sarah. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, she pleaded. It's just 1 shift. It's always just 1 shift with you. Ed's expression hardened. You need to decide what's important here. This job that pays your bills, or these pipe dreams. Sarah stood in his cramped office, the smell of grease and cheap cleaner in the air, and made her decision. I quit. The words hung between them for a moment before Ed barked a laugh. You can't afford to quit. You're right, but I'm doing it anyway. Sarah untied her apron and placed it on his desk. I'll finish today's shift. Word spread quickly. Vanessa smirked as Sarah worked her final hours, making pointed comments about the cost of childcare and the unlikelihood of Sarah ever succeeding as a lawyer. Trailer trash is still trailer trash, even with a degree, she whispered as they passed. In the kitchen. Sarah simply nodded and kept working. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. And now, finally, she was moving forward. The Blackwell and Hayes offices occupied 3 floors of a downtown high-rise. Sarah stood in the marble lobby, feeling out of place in her one good blazer thrift store find she'd carefully tailored to fit her slim frame. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her makeup minimal but professional. She'd practiced answers to potential questions for days, with Lily playing the role of stern interviewer. Sarah Cooper, a sleek receptionist, approached. They're ready for you. The interview panel consisted of 3 attorneys, a middle-aged woman with shrewd eyes, a younger man who looked perpetually amused, and an older gentleman whose silver hair and bow tie gave him an air of distinguished authority. So, Ms. Cooper, the woman began, Professor Wilkins speaks very highly of you. He says you have an intuitive understanding of tax code that can't be taught. That's rare praise from him. Sarah nodded, her mouth dry. He's been an incredible mentor. Your academic record is impressive, the younger man continued, especially considering you're working full-time while raising a child alone. My daughter is my motivation, Sarah replied simply. Tell us why tax law, the older gentleman said, leaning forward. It's not exactly the glamorous side of the legal profession. Sarah thought of her parents, of the home they'd lost, of the predatory professionals who'd exploited her father's confusion. Tax law affects everyone, but most people don't understand it, she said. That creates vulnerability. I've seen firsthand how that vulnerability can be exploited. I want to help people navigate a system that often feels designed to trap them. The older gentleman's eyebrows rose slightly. Most applicants talk about intellectual challenges or career opportunities. Your answer is ... refreshingly authentic. The interview continued for nearly an hour, with technical questions about tax code that Sarah answered with growing confidence. When they asked about her willingness to work long hours, she almost laughed. Long hours were all she'd known for years. 2 days later, she received the offer, a paid summer internship that could potentially lead to a scholarship recommendation for law school. The stipend was less than half of what she made at the diner, but it came with invaluable experience and connections. The financial reality hit hard. Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a calculator, running the numbers over and over. Rent, utilities, food, bus fare. Even with the internship stipend, they would fall short every month. We got this, Mom, Lily said, sitting across from her with uncommon seriousness. For an 11-year-old, I can help more around the apartment. And maybe I can do some babysitting for Mrs. Garza's granddaughter. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. This isn't your burden to carry, Lily, but thank you. That night, after Lily was asleep, Sarah made calls to her mother, to Professor Wilkins, to the financial aid office. She applied for emergency assistance, food stamps, and utility payment plans. She arranged to sublet their apartment and move into a tiny studio in a less desirable neighborhood, closer to downtown. She sold their television and her laptop, keeping only Lily's school tablet. The internship began in June. Sarah worked 14-hour days, absorbing everything she could about tax law in practice. She took meticulous notes, volunteered for the most complex cases, and stayed later than anyone else. At home, she and Lily adjusted to their new, even tighter circumstances. Sarah ate 1 meal a day so Lily could have 3. She walked the 3 miles to the office when bus fare meant choosing between that or lunch for her daughter. By the 3rd week, the physical toll was becoming visible. Sarah's clothes hung loose on her frame. Dark circles permanently shadowed her eyes. She hid her exhaustion behind impeccable work and fierce determination. That then came the Washington Fila complex case involving a small business owner facing an aggressive IRS audit. Sarah was assigned to help organize the documentation, a seemingly menial task. As she sorted through years of financial records, something caught her eye: a pattern in the deductions that didn't align with the business's reported activities. She hesitated before approaching Martin Hayes, the silver-haired senior partner. Interns didn't typically offer analysis. Mr. Hayes, I noticed something in the Washington file. He glanced up from his computer. Yes, there's a potential issue with the Schedule C deductions that might explain why they were flagged for audit. She carefully laid out the paperwork, pointing to the discrepancies. If we reclassify these expenses under Section 174 instead of Section 162, we could make a case for them as research and experimental expenditures. Hayes studied the documents, then Sarah, with equal intensity. How long did it take you to spot this? About an hour, she admitted. A slow smile spread across his face. It took our associates 3 days, and they missed it entirely. Well done, Ms. Cooper. The next day, Sarah was assigned to the case team, no longer just organizing paperwork but helping develop the defense strategy. When the client, a gruff, self-made businessman, visited the office, Hayes introduced Sarah as the sharp mind who found the solution to your audit problem. For the first time since she'd begun her journey, someone with real power in the legal world was looking at Sarah and seeing not a waitress playing dress-up, but a future colleague. That night, Sarah splurged on a proper dinner for Lily, complete with ice cream for dessert. "Are we celebrating?" Lily asked, eyes wide at the unexpected treat. Sarah nodded, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "I think we are, baby. I think we finally are." Sarah stared at the email, her hands trembling slightly. 3 years of sacrifice, of barely sleeping, of missing school events and birthday parties, had led to this moment. The bar exam results were in. She took a deep breath and clicked past one simple word that changed everything. Sarah Cooper was now officially an attorney at law. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. From the tiny kitchen of their studio apartment, Lily watched her mother with wide eyes. "Mom, did you... Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Lily squealed and launched herself across the room, nearly knocking Sarah off her chair. "You did it! You did it!" They danced around the cramped space, laughing and crying at once. For just this moment, Sarah allowed herself to feel the full weight of her accomplishment. She had done what everyone said was impossible, what Vanessa had mockingly called a pipe dream, what even her own mother had gently suggested might be too much. "We need to celebrate," Sarah declared, wiping her eyes. "How about ice cream for dinner?" Lily gasped dramatically. "Who are you and what have you done with my mother?" They splurged on Sundays at the fancy ice cream parlor downtown, the kind of place they usually walked past without entering. Lily took a dozen photos with Sarah's phone, insisting they document the historic occasion. "Attorney Sarah Cooper," Lily said, testing the words. "It sounds perfect." The celebration was short. Reality quickly reasserted itself in the form of student loans, bar association fees, and the daunting task of finding employment as a newly minted lawyer with no connections beyond her internship. Sarah had maintained contact with Martin Hayes, who had written her a glowing recommendation, but Blackwell and Hayes wasn't hiring entry-level attorneys this year. The job search stretched from days into weeks, with promising interviews that led nowhere. "They want experience," Sarah told her mother over the phone. "But I can't get experience without someone hiring me first." "Something will come through," Martha assured her. "You've overcome worse odds." Finally, after 6 weeks of applications and interviews, Sarah received an offer from Levinson Tax Solutions, a boutique firm specializing in helping individuals and small businesses resolve IRS disputes. The starting salary was modest by attorney standards but represented a fortune compared to her waitress earnings. On her first day, Sarah stood before her closet, surveying her limited professional wardrobe: 3 bargain blazers, 2 pairs of slacks, and a handful of simple blouses she'd accumulated during her internship. None of it felt right for this new chapter. "Wear the blue one," Lily suggested, now 14 and increasingly fashion-conscious. "It brings out your eyes." "I think I need something new," Sarah decided. "Something that feels like me, the new me." They took a rare taxi to a department store downtown, where Sarah hesitantly approached the personal shopping service. 3 hours later, she emerged with 2 designer suits, an investment in her new identity that cost nearly a month's rent. "Are you sure about this?" Lily asked as they carried the garment bags home. Sarah nodded. "Presentation matters in law. These will pay for themselves." The transformation wasn't just external. With each passing month at Levinson, Sarah grew more confident, her voice stronger in meetings, her posture straighter when addressing clients. She observed how the senior attorneys spoke, moved, and commanded attention, absorbing their techniques while developing her own style. Her first solo case involved a retired teacher facing an IRS levy over miscalculated pension distribution. Sarah recognized echoes of her parents' situation and threw herself into the defense with particular fervor. Ms. Cooper, the client said after Sarah successfully negotiated a settlement that saved her home. You fought for me like I was your own mother. I fought for you because it was right, Sarah replied. The IRS made the error, not you. You shouldn't lose your home over their mistake. Word of Sarah's success spread. Clients began requesting her specifically, impressed by her combination of technical expertise and genuine empathy. 6 months into the job, she received her first bonus and a note from Jonathan Levinson himself. You've got something special, Cooper, keep it up. The bonus allowed Sarah to make the decision they'd been discussing for months. Moving out of the studio apartment that had served as their bare-bones shelter during the leanest years. 2 bedrooms, Sarah promised as they scrolled through rental listings. In a safe neighborhood with good schools, with a real kitchen, Lily asked hopefully. Their current kitchen consisted of a mini refrigerator, a 2-burner hot plate, and about 2 square feet of counter space. With a real kitchen, Sarah confirmed. They found a modest but well-maintained apartment in a residential neighborhood, with the promised 2 bedrooms and a kitchen where more than one person could stand at a time. The windows let in actual sunlight, a stark contrast to the perpetual dimness of their studio's single north-facing window. On moving day, which consisted mostly of transporting clothes, books, and a few cherished possessions, Lily wandered from room to room, in disbelief. We have a dining room, she announced, as if discovering a palace. Sarah laughed. It's just an eating area off the kitchen. It's a dining room, and I'm claiming it, Lily insisted. We can have people over for dinner now, like normal people. The phrase hit Sarah harder than she expected. Normal people. For so long, they'd been living on the margins, scraping by, sacrificing the ordinary comforts that others took for granted. That evening, after they'd arranged their meager furniture and made up their beds, with new linens another splurge Sarah had justified as essential for their fresh start, Lily presented Sarah with a small wrapped package. What's this? Sarah asked, turning the box in her hands. Open it, Lily urged. Inside was a sleek silver pen in a velvet case. Sarah lifted it out, admiring its weight and balance. Look at the engraving, Lily said. Sarah turned the pen to catch the light. Along the side, in delicate script, were the words, S. Cooper, attorney at law. Lily, Sarah breathed. How did you? I saved my allowance, Lily said proudly. Plus, Grandma helped a little. Do you like it? I love it, Sarah whispered, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. It's perfect for signing important lawyer documents, Lily explained, and for when we move into a real house someday, and then your own law office. Sarah kissed the top of her head. One step at a time, kiddo. But looking around their new apartment, modest by most standards but a palace compared to where they'd been, Sarah allowed herself to believe that those next steps might actually be possible. Later, as Lily slept soundly in her own room for the first time in years, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table, turning the silver pen in her fingers. She thought about the diner, about Vanessa's mockery, about all the voices that had told her to accept her place in the world. She uncapped the pen and drew a single word on a notepad: revenge. Then she crossed it out and wrote beneath it, justice. 2 years passed in a whirlwind of cases, clients, and courtroom appearances. Sarah's reputation at Levinson Tax Solutions grew from promising newcomer to rising star. Her desk, once bare except for a computer and a few reference books, now featured framed certificates, client thank you notes, and a small silver plaque naming her Associate of the Year. Jonathan Levinson had taken a particular interest in her career, assigning her increasingly complex cases that showcased her unique combination of technical knowledge and persuasive advocacy. You have something the other associates don't, he told her during a performance review. You understand what it means to be truly afraid of the IRS. That empathy translates into better client relationships and more creative solutions. Sarah nodded, accepting the compliment with the quiet confidence she'd developed. I've been on both sides of the table. Her caseload reflected this strength. While other associates handled standard audit defenses and installment agreements, Sarah specialized in hardship cases, people facing home seizures, business closures, or criminal charges due to tax issues. Her success rate was remarkable, drawing attention from throughout the regional tax law community. Cooper, Jonathan called from his office doorway one afternoon. Got a minute? Sarah followed him inside, where he handed her a file stamped Winston Industries. This just came in. Major corporate client, facing a $3.2 million tax assessment, they claim is erroneous. Sarah flipped through the preliminary paperwork. This would normally go to Davidson or Mercer, she said, naming the senior partners who handled the firm's highest value clients. They're both overloaded with the Henderson case. Besides, Jonathan leaned back in his chair. I think you're ready for this. The Winston case became Sarah's obsession. She spent weeks diving into the complex web of corporate tax law, international subsidiaries, and depreciation schedules. Lily grew accustomed to her mother spreading papers across their dining table each evening, muttering about Section 482 allocations and transfer pricing methodologies. The case culminated in a tense negotiation with IRS counsel, where Sarah methodically dismantled their assessment, demonstrating computational errors and misapplied regulations. By the end of the 4-hour meeting, she had reduced the assessment from $3.2 million to $470,000, a result that made headline news in tax circles. Winston is ecstatic, Jonathan told her afterward. Their CFO wants to know if you're interested in heading their tax department, offered to double your salary. Sarah's eyebrows rose. Are you telling me to take it? Hell no, I'm telling you that you're now officially a hot commodity, Koopa, and I'm giving you a raise before someone steals you away. The raise was substantial, pushing Sarah's income into territory she'd once considered unimaginable. She opened a college fund for Lily, who at 16 was already talking about pre-law programs. She started investing, following the careful strategies her father had taught her long ago, and she began looking at modest houses in neighborhoods with trees and sidewalks, which could actually buy a place, she told Lily one evening, showing her listings on her laptop. Not just rent, actually own something. Lily leaned over her shoulder, ponytail brushing Sarah's cheek. Does this mean I could paint my room? Any color except black, Sarah laughed. What about dark purple? We'll negotiate. As Sarah's professional stature grew, so did her confidence in other areas of life. She updated her wardrobe, no longer limiting herself to the minimal professional attire she'd once stretched across weeks of wear. She joined a gym, finding that physical activity helped clear her mind after intense workdays. She even accepted occasional dinner invitations from Jonathan's son, David, a pediatrician whose gentle humor and respect for her career created a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. You look different, her mother remarked during a Sunday visit. They were sitting in the assisted living facility's garden, watching her father doze in the sunshine. His condition had stabilized, though his lucid moments were increasingly rare. Different how? Sarah asked, smoothing her silk blouse. Taller, Martha decided. You always had good posture, but now you actually take up space. You're not trying to disappear anymore? Sarah considered this. I guess I don't need to. Your father would be so proud, Martha said, glancing at her husband. Is proud, in his way. Sarah reached over to squeeze her mother's hand. I'm trying to get you both out of here, into a better place. We're fine where we are, Martha insisted. You focus on you and Lily. But Sarah had already begun researching elder care facilities with better staffing ratios and more comprehensive memory care programs. It was the next item on her list, ongoing catalog of wrongs she intended to right, one careful step at a time. The Winston case brought Sarah more than a raise. It established her as a formidable presence in corporate tax defense. New clients requested her specifically, having heard about her methodical approach and exceptional results. Jonathan created a new position for her junior partner with profit-sharing and decision-making authority. You've outgrown associate, he told her, and frankly, I'm tired of other firms trying to poach you. With her new title came a corner office with actual windows, a marked upgrade from the interior cubicle where she'd started. As she arranged her credentials on the freshly painted walls, Sarah found herself thinking about how far she'd come from the Blue Hill Diner. She wondered, briefly, what had happened to Vanessa and the others. The diner had closed a year ago. She'd driven past the shuttered building on her way to a client meeting. She hadn't allowed herself to feel satisfaction at its failure, but she hadn't felt sympathy either. That evening, she received an unexpected call from an unfamiliar number. Miss Cooper, this is Richard Blackwell. Sarah's breath caught. Richard Blackwell was the founding partner of Blackwell and Hayes, the prestigious firm where she'd interned during law school. Mr. Blackwell, this is a surprise. Martin Hayes speaks very highly of you, Blackwell said. He's followed your career with interest. We all have. That's flattering to hear. It's not flattery, Miss Cooper. It's recognition of exceptional talent, which is why I'm calling. He paused. We'd like to discuss bringing you on as a senior tax counsel. Your work on the Winston case was ... impressive. Sarah sat very still, absorbing the offer. Blackwell and Hayes was the pinnacle of tax law in the Regent, the firm that had once seemed so far beyond her reach that she'd felt like an imposter walking through their marble lobby. I'm honored, she said carefully, but I'm very happy at Levinson. Of course, loyalty is admirable, but we're prepared to make it worth your consideration. Shall we say dinner next week? The Capitol Grill at 7. After hanging up, Sarah moved to the window of her apartment, looking out at the city lights. From somewhere down the hall came the sound of Lily's music, the bass thrumming gently through the walls. Their life had achieved a stability that once seemed impossible. Now, she faced a choice that wasn't about survival but about ambition, about how high she wanted to climb, and what she wanted to prove on to whom. Sarah picked up her phone and texted David, canceling their weekend plans. She needed time to think. The Capitol Grill's dim lighting and wood paneling created an atmosphere of muted opulence. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, her navy Armani suit a calculated choice, professional, but assertive. She'd had her hair styled that morning, the honey-brown waves framing her face in a way that projected both competence and confidence. The Mota D led her to a corner table where Richard Blackwell already sat reviewing documents. He rose as she approached, his tailored suit and silver cufflinks, speaking of old money and established power. Miss Cooper, he extended his hand. A pleasure to finally meet in person. Mr. Blackwell, Sarah replied, her handshake firm. Thank you for the invitation. They exchanged pleasantries as the waiter brought water and took drink orders. Sarah opted for sparkling water, keeping her mind clear for the negotiation ahead. I'll be direct, Blackwell said once they were alone again. We want you at Blackwell and Hayes. Martin has been singing your praises since that internship, and your track record since then has been remarkable. I appreciate the interest, Sarah replied, carefully, though I'm curious why now. I've been practicing for almost 3 years, Blackwell smiled. We prefer to watch promising talent develop. Make sure it's not just potential but consistent performance. He slid a folder across the table. This is our offer. Sarah opened it, maintaining a neutral expression despite the figures staring back at her. A salary nearly double her current earnings, plus bonuses and benefits beyond anything Levinson could provide. It's generous, she acknowledged. It's commensurate with your value, Blackwell corrected. The Winston case was brilliantly handled. Your approach to Section 482 allocations was innovative. We need that kind of thinking. Sarah closed the folder. May I ask who else from your firm is joining us tonight? No one. I wanted our first conversation to be private. She nodded, then glanced around the restaurant, her attention caught by a familiar blonde head approaching the hostess stand. Vanessa. The recognition hit like a physical jolt. Vanessa stood at the entrance in a black dress, her hair twisted into an elaborate updo. She was speaking to the hostess, gesturing with familiar impatience. Is everything all right? Blackwell asked, noticing Sarah's sudden distraction. Yes, I just ... double quotes. Sarah trailed off as Vanessa was led to a station near the bar. Not a table, she realized. A workstation. Vanessa wasn't dining, she was working. You were saying about the partnership track. Sarah redirected her attention to Blackwell, though her peripheral vision remained fixed on her former tormentor. Blackwell launched into details about the firm's structure and Sarah's potential trajectory. She listened attentively, asking pointed questions about caseload, client development expectations, and work-life balance. All the while, she was acutely aware of Vanessa moving efficiently between tables, her demeanor professional but lacking the edge of superiority she'd wielded at the diner. We should order, Blackwell suggested, opening his menu. The bone-in ribeye is excellent. I'll trust your recommendation, Sarah said, though food was the furthest thing from her mind. As Blackwell signaled for a waiter, Vanessa herself approached their table. Good evening, she said with a practiced smile, her gaze fixed on Blackwell. I'll be serving you tonight. May I start you with some appetizers? Ah, yes, Blackwell began. We'll have the hello, Vanessa, Sarah said quietly. Vanessa's eyes snapped to Sarah's face, confusion giving way to slow dawning recognition. The color drained from her cheeks. Sarah, she managed, her professional veneer cracking slightly. It's been a while. It has, Sarah agreed, her voice neutral. Almost 8 years, I think. Blackwell looked between them. You two know each other. We worked together, Sarah said simply, at a diner, during law school. Something like shame flickered across Vanessa's face. Yes, we did. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, broken only when Blackwell cleared his throat. Well, small world. Now, about those appetizers. Vanessa took their order with mechanical efficiency, avoiding Sarah's eyes. When she walked away, her shoulders were rigid with tension. Former colleague, Blackwell asked, curiosity evident. Something like that, Sarah replied. The remainder of dinner proceeded smoothly, with Vanessa maintaining professional distance during her brief appearances at their table. Sarah found herself studying the woman who had once wielded such power over her daily life. Vanessa looked older, the harsh restaurant lighting highlighting lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. Her hands were dry and reddened, bearing the same occupational marks Sarah's had once carried. As they finished their meal, Blackwell presented the final element of his pitch, a partnership track that would put Sarah on course to become one of the youngest partners in the firm's history. We need your answer within the week, he said, signaling for the check. We're eager to have you on board. I'll give it serious consideration, Sarah promised. When Vanessa returned with the bill, Sarah met her eyes directly for the first time that evening. Thank you for the excellent service. Vanessa nodded, her expression guarded. It's my job. After Blackwell signed the check, adding a generous but not extravagant tip, they rose to leave. Sarah reached into her purse and placed her business card beside her water glass. It was good to see you, Vanessa, she said quietly. Outside, Blackwell offered to have his driver take Sarah home, but she declined politely. I'll take a cab. I need some time to think about our offer, I hope, he smiled. Among other things, the night air was crisp as Sarah walked toward the main avenue to hail a taxi. She'd only gone half a block when she heard rapid footsteps behind her. Sarah, wait. She turned to find Vanessa hurrying toward her, still in her work uniform, a light jacket hastily thrown over her shoulders. I can't believe it's really you, Vanessa said, slightly breathless. Tax attorney Sarah, you actually did it. Sarah regarded her steadily. I said I would. You did. We all thought. Double quotes. Vanessa trailed off, then squared her shoulders. No, I should be honest. I thought you were delusional, that you'd crash and burn. I remember, Sarah said evenly. Vanessa looked down at the business card, clutched in her hand Sarah's card, with the Levinson logo and her title embossed in silver, junior partner. Impressive. Thank you. And now Blackwell and Hayes is recruiting you. That's a big deal. Sarah nodded, uncertain why Vanessa had followed her out. To apologize, to reconnect, to ask for something. What happened to the diner? She asked, breaking the awkward silence. Vanessa's laugh held no humor. Ed was cooking the books for years. IRS caught up to him. Ironic, right? He lost everything, and we all lost our jobs. I'm sorry to hear that. Vanessa challenged, a flash of her old self emerging. Then she sighed. No, I guess you would be. You're not petty like me. A taxi approached, and Sarah raised her hand to flag it down. I should go, she said. Wait. Vanessa reached out, then let her hand fall. I just... I wanted to say I was wrong about you, obviously, and She hesitated, the words clearly difficult. I'm sorry for how I treated you back then. The taxi pulled up alongside them. Sarah studied Vanessa's face, searching for the manipulative woman who had made her life so difficult. Instead, she saw someone humbled by circumstance, worn down by the same grind that had once threatened to consume Sarah herself. Thank you for saying that, Sarah said finally. Good night, Vanessa. As the taxi pulled away, Sarah watched Vanessa's figure recede in the rear window. The encounter left her with a strange mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. She'd fantasized about this moment, showing Vanessa how far she'd come, perhaps delivering some cutting remark that would make clear the tables had turned. Instead, she felt nothing but a quiet acknowledgement that life had its own way of balancing accounts. Her revenge fantasy seemed suddenly hollow compared to the reality of her success and Vanessa's evident struggles. Sarah turned away from the window and pulled out her phone to call Lily. She had decisions to make, and she wanted her daughter's input, not about Blackwell's offer, about something much more significant that had been forming in her mind throughout the dinner. It was time to create her own path. Are you absolutely certain about this? Jonathan Levinson leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Blackwell and Hayes is offering you partner track. That's the brass ring, Sarah. Sarah sat across from him in his office. Her decision already made, I'm certain. I'm grateful for everything you've done for me here, Jonathan, but it's time. He studied her for a long moment. You know, when I hired you, I gave you 3 years before some bigger firm poached you away. You've surprised me by turning them down. I'm not staying, Sarah clarified. I'm leaving to start my own practice. Jonathan's eyebrows shot up. That's bold and premature. You've only been practicing for 3 years. 3 years here, plus my internship and clinical work. I've handled over 200 cases with a 93% favorable outcome rate. Sarah leaned forward. I know exactly what I'm doing and who I want to serve. And who is that, exactly? People who need protection from predatory tax practices, small businesses facing disproportionate audit attention, individuals navigating collection due process. Sarah paused. The clients that big firms consider too small to bother with. Jonathan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. There's not much money in that clientele. There will be enough. I'll maintain a roster of higher-paying clients to subsidize the pro bono work. You've really thought this through, he observed. I've been planning it since law school, Sarah admitted. I just needed the experience and connections first. Jonathan nodded slowly. Well, I can't say I'm not disappointed to lose you, but I respect the hell out of your ambition. He extended his hand. You'll give us reasonable notice. 6 weeks, Sarah promised, shaking his hand. And I'm not taking any clients with me. Ethical to the end, Jonathan chuckled, though I suspect some will follow you regardless. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Sarah secured a modest office space in a renovated industrial building downtown, not as prestigious as Levinson's Hyries address, but more accessible to the clients she hoped to serve. She filed the necessary paperwork to establish Cooper Tax Advocacy as a professional limited liability company. She researched practice management software, designed a simple but professional website, and ordered business cards with a logo Lily had helped create. Most importantly, she began building her team. Sarah remembered all too well the barriers she'd faced as a single mother trying to balance work and education. Her first hire was Melissa Chen, a recent law school graduate with stellar recommendations but a 6-month-old baby that made traditional firm hours impossible. I can offer flexible scheduling and remote work options, Sarah told her during the interview. What I need is your brain and your dedication, not your physical presence in an office chair for 12 hours a day. Melissa's eyes had widened. You're serious. Completely. I've been where you are. The legal profession loses too many talented women because it refuses to accommodate family life. Next came Darius Washington, a paralegal with 15 years of experience and a reputation for meticulous document management. He'd been passed over for advancement at his previous firm despite his expertise. A situation Sarah suspected had more to do with his race than his qualifications. Why are you leaving Hendricks and Ross after so long? She asked directly. Darius met her gaze evenly. Because in 15 years, I've trained 6 paralegals who were promoted to case manager over me. None of them looked like me. Sarah nodded. At Cooper Tax Advocacy, advancement is based on performance and potential, nothing else. For her receptionist and office manager, Sarah made a choice that surprised everyone, including herself. She hired Tammy Rivera, a former waitress from Blue Hill Diner, who had reached out after hearing about Sarah's new venture through Vanessa. I don't have legal experience, Tammy admitted during her interview, but I managed the diner's front of house for years. I know customer service, scheduling, and how to handle difficult people. You also knew me when I was working doubles and studying tax law, Sarah pointed out. You never joined in when Vanessa and the others mocked me. Tammy shrugged. I admired you, actually. You had a plan, and you stuck to it, no matter what anyone said. With her core team in place and her office taking shape, Sarah faced the bittersweet task of saying goodbye to Levinson Tax Solutions. Her colleagues organized a farewell lunch, presenting her with a fountain pen engraved with her initials, a surprisingly emotional moment that reinforced how far she'd come from the outsider. She'd once been, doors always open if your solo venture doesn't work out, Jonathan told her with a wink. I appreciate that, Sarah smiled, but it's going to work. On the Saturday before Cooper Tax Advocacy officially opened for business, Sarah held a small reception at the office. Her mother came, pushing her father's wheelchair. Though his condition had deteriorated, he seemed to understand the significance of the occasion, patting Sarah's hand repeatedly as she showed him around. "He's proud of you," Martha whispered. "Somewhere in there, he knows what you've accomplished." Lily, now 17 and applying to colleges with pre-law programs, played hostess with enthusiasm, showing guests around the office she'd helped decorate on weekends. Mom insisted on making the conference room extra nice, she told David, who had remained a supportive presence in their lives despite Sarah's focused dedication to her career. "She says it's where clients will decide if they trust her or not." The office reflected Sarah's practical, client-centered approach. The reception area featured comfortable seating, a children's corner with books and quiet activities, and framed educational posters explaining basic taxpayer rights in simple language. The conference room balanced professionalism with accessibility, no intimidating mahogany table, but a warm cherrywood that invited conversation. Sarah's private office was the simplest space: of functional desk, ergonomic chair, and wall-to-wall bookshelves already filled with tax code volumes and reference materials. The only personal touches were a photo of Lily, a small potted plant, and the silver pen her daughter had given her years ago, displayed in a glass case. As the reception wound down, Sarah found herself alone in this office, absorbing the quiet moment before everything began. Tomorrow, Cooper Tax Advocacy would open its doors, clients would come, cases would pile up, and the real work would begin. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unfamiliar number. "Congratulations on the new firm. I know you'll be amazing. Vanessa." Sarah stared at the message, uncertain how to respond or whether to respond at all. Their encounter at the restaurant had been civil but loaded with unresolved history. She finally typed back a simple thank you and set the phone aside. Almost immediately, it rang. Sarah answered without checking the caller ID, assuming it was Vanessa Cooper. She said professionally, "Sarah, it's Jerry. Jerry Martinez from Blue Hill." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Jerry, it's been a long time." "Yeah. Listen, I heard you started your own tax law firm." Vanessa mentioned it. "News travels fast," Sarah remarked, wondering where this was going. "I need help," Jerry said, his voice tight with tension. "The IRS is auditing me. Something about unreported income from the diner. They're saying I could face criminal charges." Sarah sat down slowly. "That sounds serious." "It is. I can't afford one of those big firms." "But Vanessa said maybe you, double quotes." He trailed off. "Look, I know we weren't exactly friends back then. I was a jerk about your studying and everything. But I'm desperate here." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. One of the very people who had mocked her ambitions was now turning to her for the expertise they'd ridiculed. "Come to my office Monday morning," she heard herself saying. "9 o'clock. Bring all your tax records for the past 5 years. Really, I mean, thank you. I'll be there." After hanging up, Sarah remained at her desk, turning her business card between her fingers. Cooper Tax Advocacy. Her name, her firm, her rules. She'd spent years fantasizing about the moment when her former tormentors would be forced to acknowledge her success. Now that it was happening, she found her emotions more complex than the simple satisfaction she'd anticipated. What Jerry needed wasn't Sarah's forgiveness, or a demonstration of her superior position. He needed her professional skills to protect him from a system that could destroy his life, the same system that had harmed her parents. Sarah opened her laptop and began creating a new client file. Whatever their past, Jerry deserved the same diligent representation as any other client. That was the standard she was setting for her practice and, for herself, justice, not revenge. Help, not retribution. Cooper Tax Advocacy was officially in business. Jerry Martinez sat across from Sarah in her conference room, his thick fingers nervously shuffling through a disorganized stack of tax documents. 6 months had passed since Cooper Tax Advocacy opened its doors, and business was steadily growing, mostly through word of mouth and referrals from Jonathan Levinson, who had proven to be a generous mentor even after Sarah's departure. "The IRS is claiming I underreported my tips by over $30,000 during my last 3 years at Blue Hill," Jerry explained, sliding a formal notice across the table. "They're saying Ed was recording higher tip amounts for all of us to reduce the diner's tax burden." Sarah scanned the document, immediately recognizing the audit technique. "They're using an indirect method to calculate your tips based on the diner's gross receipts and standard tipping percentages. But I never got those tips. Ed must have been pocketing the difference. Sarah nodded, making notes. That's exactly what it looks like. The question is whether we can prove you weren't complicit in the scheme. Jerry's face paled. Complicit. I didn't even know this was happening. The IRS doesn't know that, Sarah explained patiently. They see unreported income on your returns compared to what the diner was recording. Unless we can demonstrate you were an unwitting victim of your employer's fraud, they'll hold you responsible for the taxes, penalties, and possible criminal charges. I can't pay those taxes. I'm barely making rent since the diner closed. Sarah studied him, noting the worn cuffs of his shirt, the dark circles under his eyes. Jerry had aged considerably since their diner days. His once jovial face now carried the strained look of someone under constant pressure. Where are you working now? She asked. Security guard, night shift. It was all I could find. Sarah leaned back, thinking Jerry had been among those who'd laughed at her ambitions, though not as cruelly as Vanessa. He'd been more of a follower, joining in the mockery but rarely initiating it. Still, his words had stung during those vulnerable years. Jerry, she said finally, I'm going to help you, but I need complete honesty. Did you have any knowledge of what Ed was doing with the tip reporting? Jerry met her gaze directly. No, I swear on my kids' lives, Ed handled all the paperwork. We just signed what he put in front of us. Sarah nodded. All right, I'll take your case. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. I can't pay much. We'll work something out, Sarah interrupted. My firm has a sliding scale for fees based on financial circumstances. As she walked Jerry through her retainer agreement, Sarah's mind was already formulating a defense strategy. His case bore striking similarities to several others that had come to her attention in recent months. All former Blue Hill employees facing audit notices. It was clear that Ed's scheme had been extensive, and the fallout was affecting everyone who had worked there. After Jerry left, Sarah called Melissa and Darius into her office. We need to identify all former Blue Hill Diner employees who might be facing similar audit issues, she told them. This is bigger than just Jerry's case. Are we starting a class action? Melissa asked, excitement evident in her voice. The young attorney had proven herself to be both brilliant and driven, thriving in the flexible work environment Sarah had created. Not exactly, but we need a coordinated defense strategy. These people are being held responsible for their employer's fraud, like what happened to your parents, Darius observed quietly. Sarah nodded. During the months they'd worked together, she'd shared the story of her parents' tax nightmare with her core team. It helped them understand the mission behind Cooper, tax advocacy. Exactly. The difference is, these people have us in their corner. By the end of the week, they had identified 17 former Blue Hill employees facing similar audit notices. Sarah instructed Tammy to reach out to each one, offering a free initial consultation. What about our paying clients? Tammy asked, ever practical. This could take up a lot of our bandwidth. We'll manage, Sarah assured her. This is exactly why I started this firm. As word spread among the former diner staff, Sarah's office began filling with familiar faces, line cooks, busboys, and waitresses she'd worked alongside for years. Each carried the same fearful expression, the same confusion about tax documents they'd trusted their employer to handle correctly. Sarah created a standard intake process, assigning cases to either herself or Melissa based on complexity. For those who couldn't afford even their reduced rates, she established payment plans or, in the most desperate cases, took them on pro bono. You're going to work yourself into the ground, David commented one evening when Sarah canceled their dinner plans to prepare for an IRS conference, and bankrupt your firm in the process. I've run the numbers, Sarah replied, not looking up from her laptop. The high-paying corporate clients subsidize these cases. We're fine. David sighed. It's not about the money, Sarah. It's about you trying to save everyone. She finally met his gaze. Not everyone, just the people who deserve it, and who decides that I do, she said simply. That's the point of having my own firm. The conversation lingered in Sarah's mind as she reviewed Jerry's case file later that night. David wasn't wrong about her tendency to overextend herself, but this felt different from mere workaholism. This was purpose. The next morning, Sarah met with an IRS revenue officer to discuss Jerry's case. She presented evidence that Ed had systematically manipulated the diner's records, including affidavits from other employees describing the standard practice of simply signing whatever forms Ed presented. My client was a victim of his employer's fraud, Sarah argued. Holding him liable for taxes on income he never received is fundamentally unjust. The revenue officer, a seasoned professional named Garcia, considered her arguments. You've made a compelling case for innocent spouse relief in past cases, Ms. Cooper, but this isn't a spouse situation. The principle is the same, Sarah countered. My client had no knowledge of or benefit from the underreporting. The Internal Revenue Manual provides for relief in cases of duress or fraudulent inducement to sign returns. Garcia studied the documentation, then looked up with newfound respect. You've done your homework. I'll recommend abatement of the penalties and a reduced assessment based solely on the tips your client actually received. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was significant. Jerry would still owe some taxes but would avoid criminal charges and the most punitive penalties. More importantly, Sarah had established a precedent she could use for the other Blue Hill cases, as she explained the outcome to Jerry later that day. His eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to thank you, he said, voice thick with emotion. When I think about how we treated you back then, ... Sarah held up a hand to stop him. This isn't about back then. This is my job now. Still, Jerry insisted, you could have turned me away. After everything, ... I could have, Sarah acknowledged, but that's not who I want to be. The decision had been made long ago. She realized not when Jerry called, but years before, when she'd first committed to becoming the kind of lawyer who protected people from an overwhelming system. Her personal history with these former colleagues was secondary to the principles she'd built her practice upon. As Jerry left her office, walking taller than when he'd arrived, Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with vindication. This was better than revenge. This was redemption, not just for those who had wronged her, but for herself. Sarah surveyed her reflection in the full-length mirror, turning slightly to examine the tailored navy dress from all angles. Her hair was swept into an elegant up, a few strategically placed tendrils framing her face. The subtle makeup enhanced her features without being obvious, professional yet approachable. You look amazing, Mom, Lily said from her perch on Sarah's bed. At 18, she had grown into a poised young woman, with her mother's determination and an easy confidence Sarah had only developed in recent years. Are you nervous? A little, Sarah admitted, adjusting a delicate gold bracelet. It's been a long time since I've seen most of these people. That's the point of a reunion, isn't it? To show everyone how well you're doing. Sarah smiled at her daughter's practical perspective. It's a bit more complicated than that. Tonight was her 20-year high school reunion and event. Sarah had initially decided to skip until Lily convinced her otherwise. You should go, Lily had insisted. Let them see the badass tax attorney who's making headlines. Cooper tax advocacy had indeed been generating attention in legal circles. Sarah's coordinated defense of the Blue Hill Diner employees had earned her a reputation as a formidable advocate for taxpayers facing systemic disadvantages. She'd been featured in a regional legal journal and invited to speak at several professional conferences. I don't need to prove anything to people I haven't seen in 2 decades, Sarah had argued. It's not about proving anything, Lily countered. It's about claiming your place. You've earned it. Now, standing before the mirror in her carefully chosen outfit, Sarah acknowledged the truth in her daughter's words. The uncertain girl who had graduated high school as a single mother with limited prospects was gone. The woman who would attend tonight's reunion was successful, respected, and confident in her path. David's picking you up in 20 minutes, Lily reminded her, checking her phone. And I'm heading over to Emma's for our study group final exams. Already, AP Calculus waits for no one, Mom, not even your triumphant return to Lincoln High. Sarah laughed, giving her daughter a quick hug before Lily dashed out with her backpack. The house felt momentarily quiet, the modest 3-bedroom they'd purchased last year in a tree-lined neighborhood with excellent schools. A far cry from the cramped apartments of Lily's childhood, but still unpretentious and practical. When David arrived, he gave an appreciative whistle. You're going to be the most impressive person there. You know, I doubt that, Sarah demurred, though she appreciated the compliment. Their relationship had evolved into a comfortable companionship over the years, neither pushing for more than the other was ready to give. David understood that Sarah's priorities were her daughter and her practice, in that order. He seemed content to occupy whatever space remained. The reunion was held at a hotel downtown, the same venue where Sarah had attended a tax law conference just months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her as they entered the ballroom decorated with blue and gold streamers, the school colors she'd almost forgotten. Sarah Cooper. Oh my God, it is you, Melissa Delgado, now Melissa Hartman, according to her name. Tag approached. With the same effusive energy Sarah remembered from their shared English classes. You look amazing. What have you been up to? I'm an attorney, Sarah replied, accepting Melissa's enthusiastic hug. I have my own practice downtown. That's incredible. Criminal law. Tax law, actually. Melissa's eyebrows rose slightly. Wow, that sounds, detailed. It is, Sarah smiled. But I enjoy it. The conversation continued, with Melissa sharing details about her 3 children and her husband's dental practice. Sarah listened politely, aware of the curious glances from other classmates who had noticed her arrival. That as the evening progressed, Sarah found herself fielding similar reactions: initial interest in her career, followed by glazed expressions when she mentioned tax law, then rapid pivots to more conventional topics. Few seemed to grasp the significance of a single mother from their graduating class building her own legal practice from scratch. Cupra, no way. Sarah turned to find Jason Reeves approaching, his football player's build now softened by middle age but still imposing. He had been the high school's golden boy quarterback, prom king, and perpetual center of attention. Hello, Jason, she said politely, extending her hand. He ignored it, pulling her into a bear hug instead. Man, I haven't seen you since graduation. You disappeared after that. I had responsibilities, Sarah said, extricating herself from his embrace. A daughter to raise. Right. Jason's expression shifted to what he clearly thought was sympathetic. That must have been tough. You're doing okay now? The condescension in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. 20 years later, and he still saw her as the unfortunate classmate who'd gotten pregnant senior year. I'm doing very well, thank you, Sarah replied evenly. I own a law firm specializing in tax controversy and compliance. Jason blinked, absorbing this information. No kidding. Good for you. Seriously, I always knew you were smart. He hadn't known any such thing. Sarah could count on one hand the number of conversations they'd had in high school, and none had involved any recognition of her intellectual capabilities. Thank you, she said simply. What about you? Regional sales manager for Pinnacle Pharmaceuticals, he said, puffing up slightly. Got the whole Southeast Territory. House on the lake, twins in private school, living the dream. You know, that sounds lovely. It is. Hey, let me get you a drink. They've got an open bar. Before Sarah could respond, David appeared at her side, handing her a glass of sparkling water. Thought you might want this, he said, his hand settling comfortably at the small of her back. Jason's eyes flickered between them. Oh, hey man, Jason Reeves. David Levinson. David shook his hand. Sarah's partner. Sarah glanced at him, surprised by the phrasing, but didn't correct him. Their relationship defied simple labels, but partner was as accurate as any. Cool, Jason nodded. So you're a lawyer too? Pediatrician, David replied. Sarah's the legal mind in our household. Something in David's deliberate phrasing. Our household sent a warm current through Sarah. They didn't live together, but his casual claim of connection felt right. Somehow, Jason was called away by other classmates, and Sarah and David circulated through the room. She reconnected with a few people she'd genuinely liked, exchanged business cards with a former debate team member now working in corporate finance, and politely deflected questions about whether she handled divorces or real estate transactions. Sarah Cooper, a hesitant voice came from behind her. She turned to find Mark Dawson, looking much the same as he had in high school, thin, earnest, with wire-rimmed glasses. They'd been paired for a science project senior year, one of the few positive social experiences Sarah recalled from that time. Mark, she smiled, genuinely pleased to see him. How are you? Good. I'm teaching physics at Lincoln now, actually. That's wonderful. You always loved explaining concepts to others. He seemed touched that she remembered. I saw your name in the paper a few months ago. Something about defending a group of restaurant workers against the IRS. Sarah nodded, surprised and pleased that he'd made the connection. That's right. Former colleagues from a diner where I worked during law school. That's amazing work, Mark said sincerely. making a real difference for people who need it. For the first time that evening, Sarah felt truly seen, not as the teenage mother who had overcome odds, not as the successful professional who had exceeded expectations, but as someone whose work had intrinsic value beyond personal achievement. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot." As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself increasingly eager to leave. The initial novelty of reconnecting had faded, replaced by the realization that these people once so central to her daily existence were now essentially strangers. Their shared history was just that, history, ready to go. David asked, sensing her mood. Sarah nodded. More than ready. As they retrieved their coats, Sarah overheard a snippet of conversation from a group nearby. Cooper was always intense, even back then. No surprise, she ended up doing something boring like tax law. Did you see her guy though? Hot doctor? Chick definitely traded up from baby daddy. Sarah paused, momentarily tempted to confront the speakers. Instead, she slipped her arm through David's and walked toward the exit, head high. "You know," she said as they stepped into the cool night air, "I spent years imagining this moment, training as someone they'd have to respect. But now that I'm here, it doesn't matter what they think," David finished for her. "Exactly." Sarah smiled up at him. "I'd rather get home to Lily, see if she conquered AP Calculus." "The exciting life of a tax attorney," David teased. "Wouldn't trade it for anything," Sarah replied, meaning every word. Cooper Tax Advocacy had outgrown its original space. 2 years after opening, Sarah had expanded to the adjacent suite, doubling their square footage and adding 2 more attorneys to the team. The firm now specialized in complex tax controversy cases, with a growing reputation for taking on the IRS and winning. "Your 9 o'clock is here," Tammy announced through the intercom. "She seems pretty upset." Sarah glanced at her calendar, noting only new client referral in the time slot. "Send her in, please." She rose from her desk, smoothing her skirt and preparing to greet whoever had been referred to her services. The door opened, and Sarah froze. Vanessa stood in the doorway, nearly unrecognizable from the confident waitress who had once made Sarah's life miserable. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her face drawn and pale. She clutched a manila envelope with white-knuckled fingers. "I didn't know if you'd see me," Vanessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah recovered quickly, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk. "Please, sit down. What brings you here today?" Vanessa sank into the chair, exhaustion evident in every movement. "Jerry said you helped him with his tax problem, said you were the best." She let out a humorless laugh. "Guess I should have listened to you all those years ago." Sarah sat down, maintaining her professional demeanor, despite the surreal quality of the moment. "Why don't you tell me what's happening?" Vanessa drew a shaky breath, then opened the envelope and slid several documents across the desk. "The IRS says I owe over $100,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. They're threatening criminal charges for tax evasion. I could go to prison." Sarah examined the papers, immediately recognizing the severity of the situation. This wasn't the same level of audit that Jerry and the others had faced. This was a full criminal investigation. "These go back 6 years," Sarah observed, "well beyond the Blue Hill Diner issues." Vanessa nodded miserably. "My ex-husband, he had his own construction business. I did the bookkeeping, signed the tax returns. After we divorced 3 years ago, I found out he'd been running everything through the business, personal expenses, cash transactions, everything." "Did you know about these practices when you signed the returns?" "I suspected something wasn't right, but," Vanessa's voice cracked, "he handled the money. He told me what to record, what to sign. I didn't ask questions." Sarah continued reviewing the documents, the familiar pattern emerging: a controlling spouse, a manipulated partner, and the IRS holding both equally accountable. She'd seen it dozens of times. "I have a 7-year-old son," Vanessa said suddenly. "His father is threatening to sue for full custody if I'm charged criminally. He says I'm an unfit mother." Sarah looked up, seeing not the woman who had tormented her years ago, but someone trapped in a system designed to punish the vulnerable, the same system that had devastated her parents. "When did you receive the criminal investigation notice?" Sarah asked, switching fully into attorney mode. "Last week. I've been trying to figure out what to do. I went to another lawyer first, but he wanted $20,000 upfront." Vanessa swallowed hard. "I don't have that kind of money. I'm working 2 jobs just to make rent." Sarah nodded, thinking rapidly. Criminal tax investigations were complex and time-consuming. They required specialized knowledge and exhaustive preparation. The standard retainer at Cooper Tax Advocacy for such cases was $15,000, slightly below market rate, but still substantial. "I'll take your case," Sarah decided. "We'll need to act quickly to get ahead of the criminal investigation." Relief washed over Vanessa's face, followed immediately by concern. "But the cost, we'll work something out," Sarah said, surprising herself with the offer. "A payment plan, perhaps." "Why would you help me?" Vanessa asked, her voice small. "After everything I did to you." The question hung between them, acknowledging the complicated history that both women remembered clearly. Sarah considered her response carefully. "This isn't about our past," she said finally. "This is about your future, and your son's future. The IRS is a powerful adversary, and everyone deserves proper representation against them." Tears welled in Vanessa's eyes. "I don't deserve your kindness." "This isn't kindness," Sarah corrected, gently. "It's justice. And it's my job." She outlined the next steps: gathering documentation, preparing for interviews with IRS criminal investigation agents, building a defense based on innocent spouse relief provisions. Vanessa listened intently, taking notes with shaking hands. "This won't be easy," Sarah cautioned. "Criminal tax cases rarely are, but there are legitimate defenses in your situation, especially if you can demonstrate that your ex-husband controlled the finances and that you signed returns under duress." "I can prove that," Vanessa said with sudden vehemence. "I have texts, emails, even a recording where he threatened me if I didn't sign documents." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "That could be extremely helpful. We'll need to review everything." As they wrapped up the initial consultation, Vanessa hesitated before rising. "There's something else you should know," she said, not meeting Sarah's eyes. "My ex-husband used the same tax preparation service that got your parents in trouble." Sarah stilled. "Golden State Tax Solutions." Vanessa nodded. "They recommended all these aggressive deductions. Said it was perfectly legal. When the IRS started asking questions, they vanished overnight." The revelation sent a jolt through Sarah. Golden State Tax Solutions had been the predatory operation that had exploited her father's declining mental state, leading to the tax nightmare that had cost her parents their home and savings. She tried to track them down during law school, only to find they'd closed up shop, leaving countless victims in their wake. "How do you know about my parents?" Sarah asked. "Jerry mentioned it when he told me to come see you. Said that's why you're so passionate about helping people with the IRS." Sarah absorbed this information, pieces connecting in her mind. If Vanessa's ex-husband had been working with Golden State, there might be a pattern of victims across the region, people who had trusted the same unscrupulous preparers and were now facing devastating consequences. "I'm going to need everything you have on Golden State," Sarah said, her voice taking on a new intensity. "Every communication, every document, every name you can remember." "Of course, but why?" "Because this might be bigger than your case," Sarah explained. "If we can establish a pattern of fraudulent practices by the preparers, it strengthens your innocent spouse claim and might help others in similar situations." For the first time, a flicker of hope appeared in Vanessa's eyes. "So you think you can really help me?" "I know I can," Sarah assured her. "And you might be able to help others too." After Vanessa left, Sarah remained at her desk, staring at the notes she'd taken. The coincidence seemed too significant to ignore. Golden State Tax Solutions had destroyed her parents' financial security and was now threatening Vanessa's freedom and custody of her child. Sarah picked up her phone and called Melissa into her office. "I need you to clear some time," she said. "When the younger attorney appeared, we have a new priority case, and I think it might lead to something bigger." "Bigger how?" Melissa asked, intrigued. "I'm not sure yet," Sarah admitted. "But it connects to the reason I became a tax attorney. In the first place, that evening, Sarah sat at her dining room table, surrounded by files, Vanessa's case documents, her parents' old tax papers that she'd preserved, and notes from similar cases they'd handled at the firm. Lily, home from her first year of college for the summer, sat across from her, helping organize the materials. "So this is the woman who used to make fun of you for studying?" Lily asked, sorting papers into chronological order. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "And now she needs your help to stay out of prison." "That's right." Lily considered this. "That's some serious karma." Sarah smiled wryly. "Life has a way of coming full circle." "Are you doing this to prove something to her?" Lily asked perceptively. To show her how far you've come? Sarah paused, considering the question honestly. No, she said finally. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. And because this case might help me find the people who hurt my parents. Lily nodded, satisfied with the answer. Justice, not revenge. Exactly, Sarah agreed, touched by her daughter's understanding. As they continued, working into the night, Sarah reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this moment. The frightened waitress studying tax law between shifts had become the attorney that even her former tormentors turned to in their darkest hour. It wasn't the vindication she'd once imagined. It was something far more powerful. The conference room at Cooper Tax Advocacy was covered in documents, sticky notes, and printed emails, a paper trail spanning nearly a decade. Sarah stood before a whiteboard filled with names, dates, and connections, her sleeves rolled up and a marker in hand. Golden State Tax Solutions operated in this region from 2010 to 2018. She explained to her assembled team, they marketed themselves primarily to small business owners and independent contractors, promising maximum refunds and audit-proof returns. Melissa raised her hand, but they weren't actually CPAs or enrolled agents. No, Sarah confirmed. They were what we call ghost preparers, people who prepare returns but don't sign them or include their TIN. Technically, they just advised clients on how to fill out their own returns, keeping their hands legally clean while suggesting fraudulent deductions. Darius observed, disgust evident in his voice. Exactly. Sarah circled a name on the whiteboard. Marcus Reynolds. Based on Vanessa's records and what we've gathered from other victims, Reynolds appears to have been the ringleader. He operated under at least 3 different business names over 8 years. In the 3 weeks since Vanessa had walked into her office, Sarah had been building a comprehensive case against Golden State Tax Solutions. She'd reached out to former clients identified through Vanessa's ex-husband's records, finding a disturbing pattern of similar experiences, aggressive deductions followed by devastating audits, with the preparers nowhere to be found when the IRS came calling. What's our objective here? Asked Thomas Chen, the newest attorney on the team. Are we pursuing a class action against Reynolds? That's part of it. Sarah nodded, but our primary goal is to establish a pattern of fraudulent preparation that we can present to the IRS. If we can demonstrate that Vanessa and others were victims of unscrupulous preparers, it strengthens their innocent spouse relief claims. And helps your parents? Melissa asked gently. Sarah's expression softened slightly. It's too late for my parents. Case the statute of limitations has expired. But yes, this is personal for me too. These people need to be stopped. The investigation consumed Sarah's days and nights. She conducted interviews with former Golden State clients, compiled documentation of identical fraudulent schemes across different returns, and built a timeline of the operations activities. The pattern was clear. Reynolds and his associates targeted vulnerable individuals with limited financial knowledge, prepared returns with aggressive and often illegal deductions, collected substantial fees upfront, and disappeared when audits inevitably followed. The IRS criminal investigation interview for Vanessa is scheduled for next Tuesday, Darius reminded Sarah as they worked late one evening. Are we ready? Almost, Sarah replied, sorting through witness affidavits. I want to present them with our evidence against Golden State during the interview, show them that Vanessa was just one of dozens of victims. Bold strategy, Darius commented, turning a defensive interview into an offensive presentation. The best defense is a good offense. Sarah smiled tiredly. Especially when your client is genuinely innocent. The weekend before the IRS interview, Sarah received an unexpected call from an unfamiliar number. Ms. Cooper, this is James Walker with the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. Sarah sat up straighter, instantly alert. TIGTA was the federal agency responsible for investigating fraud and abuse within the IRS and by tax professionals. How can I help you, Mr. Walker? I understand you've been gathering information on Marcus Reynolds and Golden State Tax Solutions. We've been tracking similar operations for some time, and your name came up in connection with several cases. That's correct, Sarah confirmed, her heart racing. I represent multiple clients who were victimized by their fraudulent preparation practices. We should talk, Walker said. My team would be interested in the evidence you've assembled. The meeting with TIGTA was scheduled for Monday morning, just one day before Vanessa's IRS interview. Sarah spent Sunday organizing her most compelling evidence, creating a presentation that demonstrated the systematic nature of Golden State's fraud. This could change everything, she told Melissa as they prepared. If TIGTA opens a formal investigation based on our evidence, it could lead to criminal charges against Reynolds and help Vanessa's case. Potentially, Sarah nodded. If the IRS acknowledges that the preparers were engaging in systematic fraud, it supports our innocent spouse claim. The TIGTA investigators arrived promptly at 9 a.m. Monday. 3 serious individuals in dark suits who listened intently as Sarah walked them through the evidence she'd compiled. She explained the pattern of fraudulent deductions, the identical schemes applied across different taxpayers' returns, and the preparer's practice of disappearing once audits began. "This documentation is impressive, Ms. Cooper," Walker said after her presentation. "You've done much of our investigative work for us." "I had personal motivation," Sarah admitted. "My parents were victims of this same operation years ago. They lost their home." Walker nodded sympathetically. "Unfortunately, that's a common outcome. These preparers target the vulnerably elderly people, non-native English speakers, small business owners without financial training, like Vanessa," Sarah added. "She's facing criminal charges for returns her ex-husband had prepared through Golden State. She has an IRS interview tomorrow." Walker exchanged glances with his colleagues. "We'd be interested in observing that interview. If your client is amenable, this could become part of our larger investigation." Sarah felt a surge of hope. TIGTA's involvement could significantly change the dynamic of Vanessa's case. "I'll speak with her immediately." After the TIGTA team departed, with copies of her evidence, Sarah called Vanessa to explain the new development. "So these people are investigating the tax preparers, not me?" Vanessa asked, confusion and hope mingling in her voice. "They're investigating the preparers, but they're interested in your case as an example of the fraud," Sarah explained. "Their presence tomorrow could be very beneficial for us. It signals to the IRS agents that you're being treated as a witness rather than just a target." "Do whatever you think is best," Vanessa said. "I trust you." The words hit Sarah with unexpected force. Trust. After everything that had happened between them, Vanessa was placing her future in Sarah's hands, trusting her completely with a situation that could determine whether she went to prison, whether she kept custody of her son. "I won't let you down," Sarah promised. That night, as she made final preparations for the interview, Sarah reflected on the winding path that had led her to this moment. What had begun as a personal mission to become a tax attorney, fueled partly by her parents' misfortune and partly by the desire to prove her DINA colleagues wrong, had evolved into something larger. She was now using her expertise not just to help individual clients but to pursue systemic justice against those who exploited the complexity of tax law for their own gain. The investigation into Golden State was no longer just about Vanessa's case, or even about vindicating her parents. It had become about protecting countless others from similar predators. As she packed her briefcase, Sarah's phone lit up with a text from Vanessa. "Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for fighting for me when no one else would." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we fight together." The IRS interview had gone better than Sarah dared hope. With TIGTA investigators present, the dynamic had shifted dramatically. Instead of aggressively questioning Vanessa about potential criminal liability, the IRS agents had focused on gathering information about Golden State Tax Solutions and her ex-husband's involvement with them. "They treated me like I was helping them, not like I was some criminal," Vanessa marveled as they left the federal building. "I actually feel like I might get through this." "It's a significant step forward," Sarah agreed, keeping her optimism measured. "But we still have work to do." That work had expanded considerably. In the 2 weeks following the interview, TIGTA had formally opened an investigation into Marcus Reynolds and his associates. Sarah found herself serving as a liaison between the federal investigators and numerous victims she'd identified, coordinating affidavits and documentation that painted a damning picture of systematic fraud. Walker called again, Melissa reported, poking her head into Sarah's office one afternoon. "They've located Reynolds. He's operating under a new name in Arizona." Sarah looked up from her computer. "That's huge. Did they say if they're moving to arrest?" "Not yet. They're building the case, but they want more victim statements, particularly about the coercion aspect, how Reynolds and his people pressured clients into accepting questionable deductions." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "We should reach out to everyone on our list again, see if anyone remembers specific conversations or has any recordings." The investigation had become a parallel track to Vanessa's defense. While Sarah continued preparing the innocent spouse relief claim, the evidence against Golden State strengthened daily as more victims came forward, encouraged by the prospect of justice and potential relief from their tax burdens. Late one evening, as Sarah worked alone in her office, her phone rang. Vanessa's name flashed on the screen. "Is everything okay?" Sarah answered, concerned by the late hour. "I need to talk to you." Vanessa's voice was tight, strained. "In person, it's important. I'm still at the office. You can come now if it's urgent." 20 minutes later, Vanessa arrived, looking pale and agitated. She paced Sarah's office, hands twisting together nervously. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, gesturing for her to sit. Vanessa remained standing. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. In tax cases, especially criminal ones, client dishonesty could be catastrophic. "What haven't you told me?" "I wasn't just doing the bookkeeping for my ex-husband's business," Vanessa said, her words tumbling out. "I was actively involved in the tax preparation. I knew what was happening." Sarah kept her expression neutral despite her inner alarm. "Define actively involved." "Reynolds taught me how to prepare returns the way he did them. I started helping with the business clients, using his system for maximizing deductions." Vanessa's voice cracked. "I knew it wasn't right, but the money was good. And my ex kept saying everyone does it, that the IRS doesn't catch most people. So you were preparing fraudulent returns," Sarah clarified, her mind already racing through the implications for their defense strategy. "Yes," Vanessa admitted, finally sinking into a chair. "Not many, maybe a dozen, over 2 years, including some for the diner." Sarah went very still. "The Blue Hill Diner?" Vanessa nodded miserably. "Ed was one of my ex's construction clients. When he mentioned tax troubles, my ex recommended me to help. I prepared 3 years of returns for Blue Hill, using all of Reynolds' techniques. The fake expenses, the underreported income, everything." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Vanessa hadn't just been a victim of tax fraud, she had been a perpetrator, directly involved in the scheme that had harmed their former colleagues. "Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Because Tigda is closing in on Reynolds, and I'm terrified they'll find out about my involvement." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. "And because I can't keep lying to you, not when you've been fighting so hard for me." Sarah stood and walked to the window, needing distance to process this information. The night skyline of the city glittered before her, a stark contrast to the moral murk she now found herself navigating. "This changes our strategy completely," she said finally, turning back to Vanessa. "Innocent spouse relief won't apply if you are actively participating in the fraud." "I know," Vanessa whispered. "I've ruined everything, haven't I?" Sarah considered her options carefully. She could withdraw from representation, citing the new information that made their defense strategy untenable. Many attorneys would do exactly that, protecting themselves from the ethical complications of representing a client who had admitted to criminal behavior. "Did you prepare your own joint returns with your ex-husband?" she asked instead. "No," Vanessa shook her head. "He insisted on doing those himself. Said it was better if I didn't know the details of our personal finances." "And do you have documentation of the returns you prepared for others? Copies, notes, communications with clients?" "Some," Vanessa admitted. "I kept records as a protection in case anything went wrong. My ex doesn't know I have them." Sarah nodded slowly, a new approach forming in her mind. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to provide complete disclosure to Tigda about your involvement. Under a proffer agreement that I'll negotiate, you'll surrender all documentation and cooperate fully with their investigation into Reynolds and the larger operation." "But I'll go to prison," Vanessa protested, fear evident in her voice. "Not necessarily," Sarah countered. "Your cooperation will be valuable to their case against Reynolds, who is clearly the bigger target. We can negotiate immunity or a substantially reduced penalty in exchange for your testimony. You think they'd agree to that?" "It's our best option now," Sarah said firmly. "Full disclosure and cooperation is the only path forward." Vanessa studied her face, searching for judgment or condemnation. Finding none, she asked the question that hung between them. "Why are you still helping me? After what I just told you, after what I did to our colleagues from the diner?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Because everyone deserves competent representation. even perhaps especially when they've made serious mistakes, and because I believe in the possibility of redemption. I don't deserve redemption, Vanessa said bitterly. You should have seen how I lived back then, spending money from those fraudulent returns while looking down on people like you who were working honestly. The past is fixed, Sarah replied. What matters now is what you choose to do going forward. Tears spilled down Vanessa's cheeks. I'm so sorry, Sarah, for everything. For how I treated you at the diner, for my part in the tax fraud, for not being honest with you from the beginning. I accept your apology, Sarah said simply. Now let's focus on salvaging what we can from this situation. They spent the next 2 hours outlining everything Vanessa knew about Reynolds' operation, creating a detailed timeline of her involvement, and identifying all the returns she had prepared using fraudulent techniques. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had been both victim and participant, coerced by her controlling ex-husband, yet also making her own poor choices out of financial desperation and moral weakness. I'll contact Walker tomorrow, Sarah said as they concluded. We'll request a meeting to discuss cooperation terms. In the meantime, gather every document you mentioned and bring them to me. No copies. No holding anything back. Vanessa nodded, exhausted but somehow lighter. Thank you for not abandoning me. That's not who I am, Sarah replied. After Vanessa left, Sarah remained in her office, processing the implications of what she'd learned. The case had just become exponentially more complex, both legally and ethically. She was now representing someone who had admitted to tax fraud, the very crime she had dedicated her career to fighting against. Yet she felt strangely certain about her path forward. Vanessa's confession, though it complicated their legal strategy, represented a moral step toward accountability, and Sarah's commitment to representation, even in these difficult circumstances, affirmed her own principles of justice over retribution. She picked up her phone and called Lily, who was back at college for the fall semester. Hey Mom, her daughter answered cheerfully. What's up? I'm facing an ethical dilemma with a case, Sarah explained. I could use a sounding board. As she outlined the situation without revealing confidential details, Lily listened thoughtfully. So, your client turns out to be partly responsible for the very problem you're defending her against, Lily summarized. And now you have to decide whether to keep representing her. Essentially, yes. What does your gut tell you? Sarah considered the question that everyone deserves a second chance if they're truly remorseful and willing to make amends. Sounds like you've already decided, Lily observed. You're helping her find a path to redemption, just like you've done for so many others. But this is different, Sarah argued. She was actively involved in causing harm. Mom, Lily said gently, isn't that exactly when redemption matters most? Sarah smiled at her daughter's wisdom. When did you get so insightful? I had a good teacher, Lily replied. You always told me that real justice isn't about punishment, it's about restoration. After hanging up, Sarah gathered her things to head home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but her course was clear. She would continue representing Vanessa, helping her navigate the consequences of her actions while finding a path toward making amends. Justice, not revenge. Redemption, not punishment. The principles that had guided her career now faced their greatest test. James Walker from TIGTA leaned back in his chair, processing everything Sarah and Vanessa had just revealed. His expression remained professionally neutral, but Sarah could sense his interest in the substantial new information they'd provided. This is a significant development, he said finally. Your client's direct involvement with Reynolds changes the dynamic of our investigation. We understand that, Sarah acknowledged, but it also presents an opportunity. Ms. Klein has first-hand knowledge of Reynolds' operation that no other witness can provide: internal procedures, client communications, specific fraudulent techniques. Walker nodded slowly. That's true, and her connection to the Blue Hill Diner case provides additional evidence of the scope of their activities. The meeting was taking place in a conference room at the Federal Building downtown, 3 days after Vanessa's confession. Sarah had spent those intervening days preparing a comprehensive cooperation proposal, outlining exactly what Vanessa could offer investigators in exchange for consideration in her own case. My client is prepared to provide complete documentation, testify against Reynolds and his associates, and assist in identifying other victims, Sarah continued. In exchange, we're requesting immunity from prosecution for the activities she's disclosed. Walker exchanged glances with his colleague, a serious woman who had introduced herself as Special Agent Morales. Immunity is unlikely given her level of involvement, Morales stated flatly, but we can discuss a cooperation agreement that would substantially reduce any potential penalties. Vanessa, who had been silent throughout the exchange, looked down at her hands. Sarah could sense her disappointment but also her resignation. They had discussed this possibility that full immunity might be beyond reach. We're open to discussing terms, Sarah replied smoothly. The key point is that Ms. Klein's cooperation will significantly advance your investigation. She can provide the internal perspective you've been lacking. The negotiation continued for nearly 2 hours, with Sarah advocating persistently for the most favorable terms possible. By the end, they had reached a tentative agreement. Vanessa would provide complete cooperation and testimony in exchange for a recommendation against incarceration and a structured settlement for her tax liabilities. This is contingent on the value of her cooperation, Walker emphasized as they concluded. If the information she provides leads to successful prosecution of Reynolds and recovery of unpaid taxes from other participants, our recommendation will carry more weight. Understood, Sarah agreed, gathering her documents. We'll begin preparing the formal statement immediately. Outside the federal building, Vanessa finally spoke. So I won't go to prison. It's not guaranteed, Sarah cautioned. But if your cooperation is as valuable as we believe it will be, prison time is unlikely. You'll still face civil penalties and tax assessments, but we can negotiate payment terms once the criminal aspects are resolved. Vanessa nodded, relief evident despite the remaining uncertainties. What happens now? Now, Sarah said, checking her watch, we go back to my office and begin the real work. We need to document everything you know about Reynolds' client, every technique, every conversation. The next 3 weeks transformed Sarah's practice. While her team continued managing their regular caseload, Sarah devoted herself almost exclusively to building Vanessa's cooperation case. They created detailed timelines, flowcharts of the fraud schemes, and comprehensive documentation of every fraudulent return Vanessa had knowledge of. This is like mapping a criminal enterprise, Melissa observed one evening as they organized evidence in the conference room. It's fascinating how systematic they were. Tax fraud at this scale requires systems, Sarah explained. They developed templates for different types of businesses, standardized deduction schemes that wouldn't immediately trigger audit flags, and client management protocols to maintain deniability. The pattern that emerged was disturbing in its efficiency. Reynolds had created what amounted to a franchise operation for tax fraud, training others like Vanessa's ex-husband to implement his techniques with their own clients. The Blue Hill Diner was just one node in a complex network that spanned multiple states and affected hundreds of taxpayers. The scope is even bigger than we initially thought, Sarah told Walker during one of their regular update meetings. Based on Vanessa's records and what we've pieced together, Reynolds' operation may have prepared over 1,000 fraudulent returns in the past decade. Walker whistled softly. That would make this one of the largest preparer fraud cases we've handled. The potential tax loss could be in the millions. As the investigation expanded, so did the pressure. Sarah found herself working 14-hour days, often sleeping on the couch in her office, rather than going home. The case had become personal in ways that transcended her history with Vanessa, or even her parents' experience. You need to pace yourself, David cautioned during a rare dinner together. This case won't be resolved quickly. I know, Sarah sighed, pushing food around her plate. But we're making real progress. TIGTA is preparing to move against Reynolds based partly on our evidence, and that's remarkable, David acknowledged. But you can't single-handedly right every tax injustice in the world. Sarah smiled tiredly. Watch me try. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. During a routine review of Vanessa's emails, Sarah discovered communications between Reynolds and someone identified only as PM. The exchanges referenced political coverage and arrangement with the regional office. This could suggest corruption within the IRS itself, Sarah realized, immediately calling Walker. If Reynolds had someone providing protection or inside information, double quotes, TIGTAS response was swift. Within hours, additional investigators were assigned to trace the mysterious PM and explore potential connections to the IRS regional office. Sarah found herself navigating even more sensitive territory as the case expanded to include possible government corruption. We need to be extremely careful with this new angle, she warned Vanessa during a preparation session. If there is corruption involved, the stakes and the dangers increase substantially. Vanessa's face paled. Dangers? You mean like physical danger? The question gave Sarah pause. She had been so focused on the legal aspects that she hadn't fully considered the personal safety implications. It's unlikely, she said carefully, but not impossible. These people have millions of dollars and potentially their freedom at stake. That evening, as Sarah was leaving her office, she found an unmarked envelope that had been slipped under her door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message: drop the Reynolds investigation or face consequences. This is your only warning. Sarah stared at the note, her heart racing despite her attempt to remain calm. She immediately called Walker, who arranged for the note to be collected as evidence and advised her to take precautions. We take threats against cooperating witnesses and their counsel very seriously, he assured her. We'll increase security on Ms. Klein and provide recommendations for your own safety. The threat crystallized the reality of what they were facing. This was no longer just a tax case, it had evolved into something potentially dangerous. Sarah found herself checking her rearview mirror on the drive home, installing a security system at her house, and advising her team to be vigilant about unfamiliar visitors to the office. Maybe you should step back from this case, Lily suggested during a concerned phone call after Sarah explained the situation. Let Tigda handle it from here. I can't, Sarah replied simply. We're too close to breaking this open. And Vanessa needs me. The woman who made your life hell at the diner needs you. Lily questioned skeptically. Yes, Sarah confirmed. And all the other victims of this scheme need someone fighting for them too. Despite the threat, or perhaps because of it, Sarah intensified her efforts. She worked with Tigda to establish secure communications protocols, moved sensitive documents to a protected server, and continued building the case against Reynolds and his network. The investigation expanded to include forensic accounting analysis of dozens of fraudulent returns, interviews with additional victims, and coordination with IRS criminal investigation divisions in 3 states. Sarah found herself at the center of an increasingly complex operation, her expertise in tax law proving invaluable to investigators more accustomed to traditional financial crimes. We've identified, PM Walker announced during a secure conference call 3 weeks after the threatening note appeared. Philip Mercer, former IRS territory manager. He retired 5 years ago but appears to have maintained connections within the agency. What's his relationship to Reynolds? Sarah asked. Based on financial records, it appears Mercer was receiving regular payments through a shell company. In exchange, he may have been providing advance notice of audit targets and helping suppress investigations into Reynolds' clients. The corruption angle added new dimensions to the case. TIGTA expanded their investigation to include current IRS employees who might have connections to Mercer, while Sarah worked to understand how this information might help Vanessa's situation. If Reynolds had improper influence within the IRS, she explained to Vanessa, it strengthens our argument that you were caught in a sophisticated criminal enterprise that extended beyond tax preparation fraud. Vanessa nodded, though she seemed distracted. Sarah, I'm worried about you. That threat, it's my fault you're involved in this. I chose to take your case, Sarah reminded her, and I choose to continue despite the risks. Why? Vanessa asked, the question that had hovered between them for months, finally spoken directly. After everything, why risk so much for me? Sarah considered her answer carefully. Because this case isn't just about you anymore. It's about a system that exploits vulnerable people, that turns victims into perpetrators, that corrupts the very agencies meant to protect taxpayers. And because I believe that facing consequences doesn't have to mean being abandoned. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve your compassion. It's not about deserving, Sarah replied simply. It's about doing what's right, especially when it's difficult. As she drove home that evening, Sarah reflected on how far they had come, not just in the investigation, but in their improbable journey from antagonists to allies. The path ahead remained uncertain and potentially dangerous. But the strategy was clear. Follow the evidence wherever it led. Protect the vulnerable, and pursue justice, no matter the cost. It wasn't the revenge fantasy she'd once harbored in her darkest moments at the diner. It was something far more powerful. I'm moving you to a secure location, Sarah announced. standing in Vanessa's small apartment as her client hastily packed a suitcase. Tigda has arranged a safe house until the Reynolds matter is resolved. The threat level had escalated dramatically in the past 24 hours. Vanessa had discovered her apartment door unlocked, despite having secured it, and someone had left a child's toy, a small action figure, on her son's pillow while they were out. The message was unmistakable. "We can reach your child. How long will we be gone?" Vanessa asked, her hands trembling as she folded her son's clothes. "Uncertain. Possibly weeks." Sarah helped gather toiletries from the bathroom. "The good news is that Tigda has enough evidence to move against Reynolds and Mercer soon. They're just finalizing the warrants." Vanessa nodded, her face pale but composed. She had transformed during the months of cooperation, her former brittleness replaced by a quiet resilience that Sarah had come to respect. "What about you?" Vanessa asked suddenly. "You've received threats too." "I'm taking precautions," Sarah assured her. "My security system was upgraded last week, and I've temporarily relocated my parents to a different facility." What Sarah didn't mention was the black SUV that had followed her for 3 blocks the previous evening, or the suspicious email that had somehow bypassed her firm's security filters, containing only her home address and the words, "We know where you live." Tigda had offered her protection as well, but Sarah had declined, not wanting to disrupt her practice or alarm her team unnecessarily. Instead, she had installed panic buttons at her home and office, varied her routes and schedules, and kept David and Lily informed of her movements at all times. As they finished packing, Vanessa's son Ryan returned from a neighbor's apartment, his 7-year-old face lighting up at the sight of Sarah. "Miss Cooper, are you staying for dinner?" "Not tonight, buddy." Sarah smiled, kneeling to his level. "Actually, you and your mom are going on a little trip, like a vacation?" he asked. "Hopefully, sort of," Vanessa interjected, her voice carefully upbeat. "We're going to stay somewhere new for a little while. An adventure." Sarah helped them load their bags into her car, vigilant for any signs of surveillance. The federal agents would meet them at a predetermined location to complete the transfer to the safe house, minimizing the chance of being followed. "Thank you," Vanessa said quietly as they drove. "For everything," Sarah nodded, keeping her eyes on the road and checking the rearview mirror frequently. "You're doing the right thing. Your testimony is going to help a lot of people." "Not just for that," Vanessa clarified. "For treating Ryan so kindly, for not holding the past against me, for seeing something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." The exchange left Sarah thoughtful as she completed the handoff to the federal agents and drove back to her office. The relationship between her and Vanessa had evolved beyond attorney-client, beyond former adversaries, into something neither of them could have anticipated: a fragile but genuine respect built on shared purpose. At her office, Sarah found an unexpected gathering. Jerry, Diane, and 4 other former Blue Hill employees were waiting in the reception area, concern evident on their faces. "Tammy called us," Jerry explained when Sarah questioned their presence. "Said you might need some support." Sarah glanced at her receptionist, who shrugged unapologetically. "They needed to know what's happening. They're involved too." Over the next hour, Sarah explained the investigation's status, the threats, and the potential implications for all of them as victims of the tax fraud scheme. Rather than panic, the group responded with surprising solidarity. "We should coordinate our security," Diane suggested. "Check in with each other daily. Notice anything unusual. I can drive by Sarah's house during my security rounds." Jerry offered, "Keep an eye out." "And someone should be with her parents," added Miguel, a former line cook. "My wife works at a nursing facility. She can visit them, make sure everything's okay." Sarah was touched by their concern but hesitant to involve them further. "This investigation has become more dangerous than I anticipated. I don't want any of you at risk." "We already are at risk," Diane pointed out pragmatically. "If these people targeted you and Vanessa, they know about all of us. We're safer together than alone." The impromptu security meeting evolved into a coordinated protection plan. Phone trees were established, schedules arranged so that Sarah and her office were never left unmonitored, and a system of check-ins implemented for everyone involved in the case. "I never expected this," Sarah admitted to Melissa later, after the group had dispersed. "These are people who barely interacted outside of work at the diner." "Crisis brings people together," Melissa observed. "Plus, you've helped all of them with their tax issues. They feel indebted." Sarah shook her head. "It's more than that. It's like they've found purpose in this fight. the same way I did. That evening, as Sarah prepared to leave the office, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Ms. Cooper. A male voice asked when she answered. This is Brian Klein, Vanessa's ex-husband. Sarah immediately tensed. How did you get this number? Not important, he dismissed. What matters is that you're interfering in things you don't understand. Reynolds has powerful friends. This won't end well for you or Vanessa. Are you threatening me, Mr. Klein? Sarah kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'm warning you, as a courtesy. For Ryan's sake. His voice hardened. Tell Vanessa to withdraw her cooperation. Tell Tigda she made everything up. Otherwise, I can't guarantee what might happen. I'll be sure to inform Tigda about this call, Sarah replied coolly. They'll be very interested to add witness intimidation to the charges against you and your associates. Klein's laugh was cold. You think this is just about tax fraud? Reynolds' operation has protection from people you can't touch. People who can make you and your little law firm disappear overnight. After he hung up, Sarah immediately called Walker, relaying the conversation verbatim. He specifically mentioned protection from people you can't touch. That suggests the corruption extends beyond Mercer. We're exploring those connections, Walker assured her. In the meantime, I'm assigning an agent to monitor your location. No more declining protection. Sarah, this has escalated. The next morning, Sarah arrived at her office to find an unmarked sedan parked outside with a plainclothes agent inside her new security detail. Inside, she was surprised to discover David waiting in her private office. Before you protest, he said, raising a hand to forestall her objections. I've rearranged my schedule to work remotely from your conference room for the next few weeks. I'll be unobtrusive but present. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. The determination in his eyes matched the protective instinct she felt toward her clients. Thank you, she said simply. As the day progressed, Sarah became aware of other changes. Jerry appeared at lunchtime with food for the entire office. Diane called hourly with casual-sounding check-ins. Miguel's wife reported that Sarah's parents were comfortable and under discreet observation at their facility. The community she had once felt so separate from had rallied around her, forming a protective circle against unknown threats. They had transformed from former colleagues to allies, bound by shared experience and common purpose. That night, as she prepared to leave under the watchful eye of her Tigda escort, Sarah received a text from Lily. All my finals are online, coming home tomorrow. No arguments. Sarah smiled despite her concern. The protection she had always provided to others was now being returned in full measure, not because of obligation or fear, but because of genuine care and shared commitment to seeing justice done. The threats had intended to isolate her. Instead, they had revealed the strength of connections she hadn't fully recognized until they were tested. The federal courtroom hummed with tension as Sarah sat beside Vanessa in the witness preparation room. After months of investigation, documentation, and protection, the moment of confrontation had arrived. Marcus Reynolds and Philip Mercer would be arraigned today on multiple charges, including tax fraud, witness intimidation, and corruption of public officials. Remember, answer only what's asked, Sarah advised, reviewing key points one final time. Don't volunteer additional information or try to explain your own actions unless specifically questioned about them. Vanessa nodded, smoothing her conservative, navy suit borrowed from Sarah's closet for the occasion. What if they ask about my involvement? How much I knew? Tell the truth, Sarah said simply. Your cooperation agreement depends on complete honesty. The prosecutors know your role and have factored it into the charges. They had prepared extensively for this testimony. Under the agreement Walker had negotiated, Vanessa would provide key evidence against Reynolds and his operation in exchange for consideration in her own case. The prosecutors had agreed not to recommend incarceration, though she would still face substantial financial penalties. Miss Cooper, a judicial assistant, appeared at the door. They're ready for Miss Klein's initial testimony. Sarah squeezed Vanessa's hand encouragingly. You've got this, just like we practiced. As they entered the courtroom, Sarah was struck by the full gallery: journalists, legal observers, and a surprising number of familiar faces. Jerry, Diane, and several other former Blue Hill employees sat together in one row. Her own team from Cooper Tax Advocacy occupied another. Even David and Lily had come, sitting near the back with supportive expressions. And there, at the defense table, sat Marcus Reynolds and Philip Mercer, the architect of the tax fraud scheme, and his government protector. Reynolds was smaller than Sarah had imagined, an unremarkable man in an expensive suit. His expression blandly confident, despite the circumstances. Mercer looked like any retired civil servant, gray-haired and slightly stooped, his former IRS authority now diminished by the allegations against him. Vanessa was called to the stand, sworn in, and began her testimony under the prosecutor's careful questioning. She described the structure of Reynolds' operation, the standardized fraud techniques, and the system of protection Mercer had provided. Her voice trembled initially but strengthened as she continued, her responses clear and direct as they had practiced. When the defense attorney rose for cross-examination, his approach was immediate and aggressive. "Miss Klein, isn't it true that you personally prepared fraudulent tax returns as part of this alleged scheme?" he demanded. "Yes," Vanessa admitted, her gaze steady. "As I've acknowledged in my cooperation agreement. So you're a confessed tax criminal testifying against my clients to save yourself from prison," he pressed. Before Vanessa could answer, the prosecutor objected. "Argumentative, Your Honor." "Sustained," the judge ruled. "Rephrase, counselor." The defense attorney adjusted his approach but continued hammering at Vanessa's credibility, highlighting her participation in the fraud, while minimizing her claims about Reynolds' leadership role. Through it all, Vanessa maintained her composure, neither defensive nor evasive about her own actions. When court recessed for lunch, Sarah met Vanessa in the witness room. "You're doing great," she assured her. "The defense is trying to discredit you by emphasizing your involvement, but that was expected." "It's harder than I thought," Vanessa admitted. "Seeing Reynolds there, so smug, like none of this touches him, that's about to change," Sarah promised. "The documentary evidence backs up your testimony completely." The afternoon session brought a dramatic shift. The prosecution introduced financial records showing the flow of funds between Reynolds' various entities and Mercer's offshore accounts. They presented emails and text messages recovered from seized devices, including communications about specific taxpayers who needed special handling to avoid audit attention. Most damaging was the evidence about Blue Hill Diner and other small businesses whose owners had been left facing devastating tax assessments while Reynolds and his associates collected substantial fees. The human cost of the scheme became increasingly clear as the prosecution built its case methodically. During a brief recess, Sarah noticed Reynolds watching her from across the courtroom, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he smiled, slightly, and nodded, as if acknowledging a worthy opponent. The gesture sent a chill through her despite the crowded courtroom. As the proceedings continued, a surprising development emerged. The prosecution called an unexpected witness, Congressman James Whitfield, chair of a House subcommittee with IRS oversight responsibilities. "Congressman Whitfield," the prosecutor began, "can you explain your relationship with the defendant Philip Mercer?" The congressman shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Mercer occasionally provided informal guidance on tax policy matters after his retirement from the IRS. "And did he ever request special consideration for certain taxpayers or tax preparation firms?" "He made some recommendations," Whitfield acknowledged reluctantly. "I understood them to be legitimate professional referrals." The questioning continued, revealing a pattern of political protection that extended beyond Mercer's direct influence within the IRS. Whitfield had used his position to deflect scrutiny from Reynolds' operation, intervening when investigations threatened to gain traction. The implications were staggering. What had begun as a case about fraudulent tax preparation had expanded to expose corruption at multiple levels of government. The gallery murmured as connections were drawn between political campaign contributions from Reynolds' various entities and Whitfield's interventions on behalf of the scheme. "We're going to need additional security," Walker murmured to Sarah during a break. This just expanded well beyond tax fraud. Sarah nodded, watching as reporters rushed from the courtroom to file updates. The story would break nationally by evening, with potential implications for tax administration, political oversight, and public trust in government institutions. As the day's proceedings concluded, the judge ordered both defendants held without bail, citing flight risk and the serious nature of the charges. Reynolds' confident demeanor finally cracked as he was led away in handcuffs, shooting a venomous glance toward Vanessa and Sarah. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing as Sarah and Vanessa emerged with their Tigda escort. "Ms. Cooper," Is it true your investigation uncovered political corruption beyond the IRS? Ms. Klein, did you fear for your safety during this process? Sarah stepped forward, Vanessa slightly behind her. We have no comment on ongoing proceedings, except to say that we have full confidence in the justice system and the prosecutors handling this case. As they pushed through the crowd toward their waiting car, Sarah heard her name called from a different direction. She turned to see Jerry, Diane, and the other former diner employees forming a protective barrier between them and the more aggressive reporters. We've got you, Jerry said simply, helping clear a path to the vehicle. Once safely inside, Vanessa exhaled shakily. I didn't expect all that about the congressman. How deep does this go? Deeper than we initially thought, Sarah admitted. Tax fraud schemes this successful often require protection at multiple levels. Reynolds couldn't have operated for so long without significant cover. What happens now? The prosecution will continue building their case. There will be more hearings, possibly additional charges, as they follow the money and the connections. Your testimony today was just the beginning. Vanessa nodded, staring out the window at the media circus still forming outside the courthouse. Do you think they'll actually go to prison? People like Reynolds and Mercer usually seem to escape real consequences. Not this time, Sarah said with quiet certainty. There's too much evidence, too much public attention now. And this case has revealed systemic issues that extend beyond just these defendants. That evening, Sarah's living room became an impromptu war room. Lily and David ordered pizza for the assembled group. Sarah's legal team, Walker and another TIGTA investigator, and Jerry representing the former diner employees. They watched news coverage of the day's revelations, with political analysts already speculating about potential fallout from Whitfield's involvement. This could lead to reform legislation, Walker noted. The corruption pathway they exploited needs to be closed, and the victims need restitution, Sarah added, not just financial, but recognition that they were targeted by a sophisticated scheme with political protection. As the night wore on and the discussion continued, Sarah found herself reflecting on the long, improbable journey from the Blue Hill Diner to this moment of confrontation with powerful forces. What had begun as her personal quest for validation and justice had evolved into something far larger, fight against systemic exploitation that victimized vulnerable taxpayers. The threats remained real. Reynolds had connections they hadn't yet identified, and the case had powerful people worried about what might be revealed next. But Sarah no longer faced these dangers alone. She was surrounded by Alice's colleagues, friends, former antagonists transformed into supporters, all united by a common cause. As the gathering finally dispersed, David stayed behind, helping clean up while Lily went to bed. You know, he said quietly, when you first told me about Vanessa and your history with her, I thought you were taking her case out of some need to prove yourself to her, to show how far you'd come. Sarah smiled slightly. Maybe that was part of it initially, but it became something else, he observed. Something more important than old grievances. Justice isn't about settling scores, Sarah replied, thinking of all they had uncovered, all that still remained to be revealed. It's about creating a system where power can't be weaponized against the vulnerable. David nodded, understanding in his eyes, even when the vulnerable aren't perfectly innocent themselves. Especially then, Sarah agreed, thinking of Vanessa's complicated role in the story, victim and perpetrator both, now seeking redemption through truth. That's when justice is most needed, and most challenging. Outside, a TIGTA agent remained on watch, a reminder that the confrontation was far from over. But for tonight, at least, Sarah allowed herself to feel the weight of what they had already accomplished, the first public exposure of a corruption scheme that had harmed countless taxpayers, including her own parents. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, the confrontation had been joined, and truth had taken its first steps into the light. 5 years later, Sarah stood at the podium in the law school auditorium, looking out at the eager faces of students attending her guest lecture on ethics in tax representation. The irony wasn't lost on her how her most challenging case had become a standard teaching example in professional responsibility courses. The Reynolds case fundamentally changed how we view the intersection of tax preparation, governmental oversight, and professional ethics, she explained. It demonstrated that tax professionals face unique ethical challenges when their clients may be both perpetrators and victims within the same system. A hand rose from the middle of the room. Ms. Cooper, wasn't your own relationship with the Key witness, unusually complex. Given your history with her before law school, Sarah smiled slightly. The case had become so well known that her personal connection to Vanessa was now part of the standard narrative. Yes, she acknowledged. Our prior relationship created additional ethical considerations, but ultimately, the principles remained the same: zealous representation within the boundaries of the law, even when representing someone who had once caused you harm. The lecture continued for another 30 minutes, with Sarah fielding questions about the practical and ethical dimensions of the case that had defined her career. She concluded with the outcomes that still resonated 5 years later. Marcus Reynolds had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for tax fraud, witness intimidation, and racketeering. Philip Mercer received 8 years for his role in providing governmental protection to the scheme. Congressman Whitfield had resigned in disgrace, later pleading guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation against other officials involved in the corruption network. Most significantly, the case had sparked substantial reforms in tax administration, oversight, and preparer regulation. The Reynolds Act, as it was informally known, had established stronger penalties for ghost preparers and created new protections for taxpayers victimized by fraudulent preparation schemes. The greatest victory, Sarah told the students, wasn't the prison sentences or even the legislative changes. It was the restoration of confidence in a system that should protect vulnerable taxpayers rather than exploit them. After the lecture, as Sarah gathered her materials, a young woman approached the podium. "Ms. Cooper, I'm Professor Michaels, research assistant. I've been studying your approach to the Blue Hill Diner Group representation. The way you coordinated their defense was remarkable." "Thank you," Sarah replied, though much of the credit belongs to the clients themselves. They formed an extraordinary support network during a difficult time. "Actually," the student continued, "that's what I wanted to ask about. How did you transform adversarial relationships into collaborative ones, particularly with Ms. Klein?" Sarah considered the question. "I didn't set out to transform relationships. I focused on justice for each individual, regardless of our history. The transformation happened naturally through that process." As she left the law school, Sarah checked her watch. She had just enough time to make it to the restaurant where the real celebration awaited. The private dining room at Castellanos was filled with familiar faces when Sarah arrived. Jerry and his wife waved from one end of the long table. Melissa and Thomas, now partners at Cooper Tax Advocacy, chatted with Darius near the windows. Lily, home from her second year of law school, was deep in conversation with David, there, hands casually intertwined in a gesture that still warmed Sarah's heart. And there, arranging place cards with meticulous care, was Vanessa. "You're late," she chided without looking up. "The caterer needs final approval on the dessert menu." Sarah laughed. "Hello to you too." The lecture ran long. Vanessa straightened, her expression softening. "How were the baby lawyers?" "Suitably impressed by your war stories, appropriately analytical about the ethical implications," Sarah corrected, "though they were certainly intrigued by our colorful history." 5 years had transformed Vanessa almost beyond recognition from the desperate woman who had first entered Sarah's office. After completing her cooperation requirements and settling her tax liabilities through a structured payment plan, she had rebuilt her life with remarkable determination. She now worked as the office manager for Cooper Tax Advocacy, her intimate knowledge of fraudulent practices making her invaluable in identifying potential issues in client cases. Her son Ryan, now 12, was thriving in school, his earlier anxiety replaced by confidence and stability. "Everyone's here except Walker," Vanessa noted, glancing around the room. "He texted that he's running late." Typical Tigda, always making an entrance. The celebration had been planned for months, marking 5 years since the Reynolds verdict and the formal conclusion of all related cases. The final appeal had been denied 3 weeks earlier, closing the last legal chapter of their shared ordeal. Sarah circulated through the room, greeting each person with genuine warmth. These people who had gathered to celebrate were more than colleagues or clients. They had become her extended family, bound by shared purpose and mutual support. "Speech time," Jerry suggested as the appetizers arrived. "Before we get too deep into the wine." Sarah shook her head. "Not yet. Let's wait." For Walker, James Walker arrived 20 minutes later, apologizing for his tardiness but bearing news that justified the delay. "The Oversight Committee approved the Victim Compensation Fund this morning," he announced as he joined them. full restoration of penalties and interest for all identified victims of the Reynolds scheme, plus consideration for additional damages in cases of demonstrated hardship. A cheer went up around the table. This final piece of justice, financial restoration for those harmed by the fraud, had been Sarah's persistent advocacy project for years after the criminal cases concluded. To Sarah, Jerry proposed, raising his glass. Who never gave up on any of us, even when we gave her every reason to. To all of us, Sarah countered, lifting her own glass. For proving that justice isn't just about punishment, but about restoration and growth. As dinner progressed, conversations flowed between serious reflections on how far they had come and light-hearted reminiscences about the more absurd moments of their shared journey. Lily entertained the table with impressions of the more pompous attorneys they had encountered, while Jerry recounted the time he had accidentally triggered the office panic button while reaching for a light switch. Later, as dessert was served, Sarah found herself seated beside Vanessa in a quiet moment. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Vanessa asked softly. "That night at the diner, when everyone was laughing at your tax law books." "Not even close," Sarah admitted. "Though I did occasionally imagine rubbing my success in your face." Vanessa laughed. "I deserved worse. We've both come a long way from who we were then. Thanks to you," Vanessa said seriously. Sarah shook her head. "Thanks to your own choices. When it mattered most, you chose honesty and accountability over self-protection. That changed everything." "Still," Vanessa insisted, "you could have turned me away when I came to your office. No one would have blamed you." "I would have blamed me," Sarah replied simply. Their conversation was interrupted by Walker tapping his glass for attention. "I'd like to make an announcement," he said, standing. "As some of you may have heard, I'm retiring from TIGTA next month." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the group. Walker had become a valued ally over the years, continuing to consult with Cooper Tax Advocacy on complex cases even after the Reynolds matter concluded. "What I haven't told anyone," he continued, "is that I've accepted a position with the National Taxpayer Advocate's Office, focusing on systemic reform initiatives." He smiled at Sarah. "Some passionate tax attorneys convinced me that there's still important work to be done." The news was met with enthusiastic approval. The National Taxpayer Advocate was an independent organization within the IRS, dedicated to helping taxpayers resolve problems and recommending changes to prevent future issues, exactly the kind of structural reforms Sarah had been advocating for years. "You're going to be brilliant," she told him sincerely. As the evening wound down, David approached with their coats, ready to head home. Lily's catching a ride with Melissa. Home. The word still carried special significance for Sarah. After years of cramped apartments and financial struggle, home was now a comfortable house with a garden that David had helped plant, bookshelves filled with legal texts and family photos, and space for Lily whenever she visited from law school. "Almost ready," Sarah replied. "Just one more thing." She made her way to where her mother sat chatting with Jerry's wife. Martha Cooper had aged gracefully, despite the hardships of caring for Sarah's father, until his passing 3 years earlier. She now lived in a comfortable apartment near Sarah, her resilience a constant inspiration. "How are you holding up, Mom?" Sarah asked, sitting beside her. "Couldn't be better," Martha smiled. "Your father would have been so proud today, seeing everything you've accomplished, all these people whose lives you've touched." "I wish he could have been here to see it," Sarah said softly. "He knows," Martha assured her. "Wherever he is, he knows his daughter became exactly the advocate he always believed in." Later, as Sarah and David drove home through the quiet streets, she found herself reflecting on the long journey from that fluorescent-lit diner to the life she now led. The mockery that had once stung so deeply had faded into irrelevance, replaced by the satisfaction of meaningful work and genuine connection. "Penny, for your thoughts?" David asked, reaching for her hand across the console. "I was just thinking about how revenge fantasies pale compared to actual justice," Sarah replied. "For years, I imagined showing everyone who doubted me that they were wrong, but that would have been such a small victory compared to what actually happened, creating lasting change instead of just proving a point." David nodded. "Exactly. All those people tonight, they're not in my life because I proved them wrong. They're there because together, we created something right." The house was quiet when they arrived home, lights left on in the entryway by Lily's thoughtful preparation earlier that day. On the hall table sat a small wrapped package that hadn't been there when they left. "What's this?" Sarah wondered, picking it up. Inside was a silver frame containing the crude drawing Lily had made years ago, future law office, with the stick figures of mother and daughter standing proudly outside. Attached was a note in Lily's handwriting: "Dreams come true, even the ones drawn by 10-year-olds. Love you, Mom." Sarah traced the childish lettering with her finger, remembering the night Lily had given her this drawing, one of their darkest moments financially, when continuing her education had seemed nearly impossible. Now Lily was following in her footsteps, at law school, planning to join Cooper Tax Advocacy after graduation. "Full circle," David observed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "And then some," Sarah agreed, leaning into his embrace. The journey hadn't been about revenge after all. It had been about creating a legacy of justice that would extend far beyond the hurts and struggles of the past, a victory not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated, exploited, or dismissed. "They laughed when I studied tax law at night," Sarah thought, placing the framed drawing on the mantel. "Now they understand why it mattered so much."